seat. I'm calling this June 15th Town Council meeting to order, and I'll turn to Ms. Jackie Rose to call the roll, please.
Councilmember Steve Rice.
Here.
Councilmember Barbara Spector. Here. Councilmember Joe Pazinski.
Here.
Vice Mayor Diane McNutt. Here. Mayor and Chair Mike Wasserman.
Here. Thank you very much. Joining us tonight for the Pledge of Allegiance are members of the Los Gatos High School swim team and their coaches. These athletes have just finished a very impressive 2009 season, yet another group of Los Gatos youth who bring honor to the high school and our town. As you'll hear in the commendation I'll read just in a minute, these swimmers are not only fast, they're smart too. Los Gatos can be proud of the dedication and abilities of these boys and girls, both individually and on teams, as they broke school records and qualified for the Central Coast Section Finals. If you've been following council meetings over the past months, I think you'll get the picture that Los Gatos youth excel in just about everything they touch, whether it's sports, academics, or social consciousness. These swimmers are the latest example of the extraordinary youth that call Los Gatos home. And now I'll ask the Los Gatos swim team to join me up front. Taking everybody in so you can slide within the table. Let the shorter ones in the front. Come on. There we go. They're expert swimmers. All right. All right. Are we on there? We are on. Okay. What we're going to do first is we're going to have the Pledge of Allegiance, and I'd like one of the members here, the swim team coach, who should lead us.
Oh, I think Courtney should.
Courtney.
Thank you.
There you go. And if you'll all join us, please, in the Pledge of Allegiance. Behind Joe.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Let's hear it for Courtney. All right, and Coach, why don't you come up here? Coach, whereas the Los Gatos High School swim team under Coach Kurt Crochet, Rachel Peters, Michael Berwald, and Paris DeSoto have excelled in the 2009 season. And whereas the boys and girls 200-meter freestyle relay teams and the boys 400-meter freestyle relay teams clocked all American times at both the Santa Clara Valley Athletic League De Anza Division Finals and the Central Coast Section Finals. And whereas the Los Gatos High School swim team, led by varsity team captains Courtney Seller, was that Courtney we had here?
Yes.
Courtney, raise your hand when I say your name, please. Courtney, Tyler Schultz, right back there, and Jack Penner. Jack's not available tonight. He's having his first water polo practice at Santa Clara University. Broke a total of 4 school records and 1 SCVAL record in events at the SCVAL and CCS finals. And whereas 9 boys, 3 girls, and all 3 relays for both the boys and the girls teams qualified for CCS finals, where a total of 4 individual swimmers and 5 relay teams placed. And whereas the Los Gatos High School boys swim team demonstrated their versatility by also winning the Central Coast Section Scholastic Championship with a combined GPA of 3.86, ranking the highest GPA of all spring sports in the Central Coast section. And now, therefore, the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos does hereby commend and congratulate the Los Gatos High School swim team members and their coaches for their team spirit and exemplary 2009 season. Let's hear it for these champions. And Coach, if you have a few words you'd like to say.
Oh, boy.
A few words.
Just want to thank you, first of all, for inviting us here. It's very, very special. And
what is so special is that we live in this community where we are supported by all of you, and that I'm so honored to be able to teach so many of these fine student athletes, and they really are student athletes. They are students first, and then just incredible athletes. So thank you very much, and thank all of you. Thank you.
And Coach, we have some pins that each of the council members wears, and this is for each of the team for you to pass out when you seem appropriate. Thank you very much. Thank you, and thank you all. Thank you all very, very much. Thank you. How about that? Champions and a 3.86. That's absolutely incredible. Now I'd like to invite the members of the Los Gatos Rowing Club and their coaches, Patrick Lynch and Derek Burns, to join me at the podium. Come on around. Taller ones in the back, shorter in the front. Welcome back, welcome back. Is it true you were all in Cincinnati a couple of days ago? Yeah? Yeah? Got back today. Got back today. Scoot on in here, Coach. You're getting behind. Get everybody in between. Run over there. All right. In case you haven't noticed, we have a water theme going here. First, we have the team that's in the water, and now we have the team that's on the water. And the team on the water are national champions. Let's hear it. Coach Lynch, if I could ask you to come forward, I've got a commendation to read to you on behalf of your team, and then I'd like you to say a few words about any developments that might have taken place in the last couple of days. All right. Whereas the Los Gatos Rowing Club, the LGRC, has been an outstanding member of the community both on and off the water for 30 years. With the support of head coaches Patrick Lynch and Derek Burns, this nonprofit organization has provided a safe environment to instruct young athletes on sport and life lessons, such as, bless you, the value of teamwork, dedication, sportsmanship, and cooperation. And whereas the Los Gatos Rowing Club has over 110 athletes, including junior rowers ages 13 through 18 and master rowers ages 30 and over, who provide guidance for the younger athletes in the program on community outreach efforts, such as Row for the Blind, and other similar programs that introduce individuals to a sport they may not otherwise have experienced. And whereas the junior women lightweight 8 have won the national title the last 2 years in a row, but we'll get to that in just a minute, and are returning this year to defend their championship rankings. And in 2008, this is Coach Derek?
This is Coach Matt.
Okay.
We have a lot of coaches.
All right. Good. All right. Let's see. In 2008, Junior Women Varsity 8 won the Junior Women's category in the Women's Henley, held in England, and will also compete in the 2009 Nationals. And whereas 2 of the junior women have been selected to attend the Junior National Selection Camp out of only 24 rowers across the nation that are selected for this honor. Do we have those 2 here? One. Can you raise your hands? Wonderful. Out of 24 rowers across the nation are selected for this honor, possibly placing them in the junior national boat. Whereas the men's junior varsity program will be sending a total of 27 rowers with 3 boats to compete in the nationals for titles in varsity and lightweight categories. Now, therefore, the Town Council of the Town of Los Gatos does hereby commend and congratulate the Los Gatos Rowing Club and their coaches, Patrick Lynch and David Burns, for their team spirit and exemplary athletic performances both in and out of the water. Let's hear it for the Rowing Club. Patrick has some news to share.
Derek is actually sitting in traffic. He coaches with us and has been a mentor and a very good friend for the last 2 years. Matt Pinchmit also coached with us this season, and we're very proud to say that we are bringing home the lightweight trophy national for the 3rd time in a row. The last 5 weeks have been very busy, and David Hinshaw, who is actually the men's coach, should also be mentioned here for his amazing accomplishment of getting the men's varsity 8 to nationals for the first time in 9 years. The men's program is just as strong and just as energetic, and we're proud to be a part of it all together. And we have our president, John Kemp, here, and that's just a sign of the amount of volunteer masters that we have in support of our kids. And it wouldn't be anything without parents as well who stand on the board and stand at the regattas and support the coaches. And really what it's all about is the kids that are standing behind me right now and what they represent to this community. They're student athletes. They're from all over St. Francis, different high schools, and all over the place. And we're just so proud of them. And I look forward to seeing the amazing things they do in their life. Cheers.
Thank you. Let's hear it for him. Thank you for coming. I imagine the medals they're winning right now are from what they just did in Cincinnati. That's correct. So about 48 hours ago, they were in Cincinnati and made it back, and there's the trophy as she showed right there for being national champions for the third year in a row. And as you said, we have President John Kemp here. And I also wanted to thank you, President John, for the Los Gatos Rowing Club's participation in our town-wide outreach of Project Cornerstone. I really appreciate that and all the members that you're introducing to that program. Thank you. This is the commendation for you, Coach, right there. You're welcome. And here's some pins for your rowers on behalf of the town of Los Gatos. Thank you very much. Take care. And before we proceed to our closed session report, I understand we have a few of our youth commissioners here. I'd like them to stand up and be recognized. That means applauded, people, for their successful selection to participate on the town's commissions. First, we have Rod Farhadi. There's Rod. Let's give him a round of applause. Jacob Hirschberger. Matthew Mingroni. And I'll do my best on this one. Zaul Moyidian. Did I get it right the second time? Yes? All right. Thank you. The second announcement I have to make is a bit somber. It's to report the passing of Officer Quartz, our well-loved, sweet, and heroic canine officer, who, along with Officer Sam Winnell, protected our streets and taught our kids to avoid risky behaviors for many, many years. Quartz was 12 years old, Mr. Larson, I believe. 12 years old, Chief? About 12 years old. Served this community wonderfully, and unfortunately he needed to be put to rest. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. Korb to give our closed session report.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, members of the public. Council met in closed session tonight on 3 separate items. The first was a conference with its labor negotiators concerning all of the town's represented and unrepresented groups, a conference with its real property negotiator concerning 930 University Avenue, and a public employee performance evaluation concerning the town manager. Council discussed all 3 items, gave direction where appropriate. No final reportable actions were taken, and that concludes my report.
Thank you very much, Mr. Korb. And one announcement I forgot to make in the beginning, if anyone has any cell phones, I'd appreciate you turn it to vibrate or off or silent, anything that doesn't make a noise. Also, a little reminder that if anyone would like to address the council tonight under verbal communications or any item on the agenda, in front of you you'll find one of these beige colored cards. Please fill it out and return it to the clerk here to my left, to your right. And we'll give the 2 groups a chance to exit the council chambers. Anybody of any age watching out in the community, I encourage you to look into the Los Gatos Rowing Club for athletic efforts, for community service. They're a tremendous organization that does a lot here. And now that we have water again in Lexington, they'll be able to practice again in our local reservoir. All right, now we're at council matters, and I'll look to council. No special matters. Oh, Councilmember Przinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
You're welcome.
This is a follow-up to a council matter that I raised last time we met, and that's in relationship to the Town Plaza rehabilitation. And I wanted to just, for the council, make a statement that I think we've all seen that the rehabilitation, the sod, has not actually successfully been implanted to our satisfaction at this time, and that I would want to make sure that we pay attention to this so that subsequent to our summer festivities, Jazz in the Plaza, that once we have gotten through our summer, that we return to rehabilitation, and therefore the certificate of acceptance and notice of completion, I think, should be held in abeyance until such time as we have been able to successfully achieve what our goal was by that process. So if I might ask the manager if he'd like to respond to that.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, staff certainly shares the concern over the Town Plaza rehabilitation. We're very pleased with the fountain's performance, but the sod is not meeting the standards we'd like to have for one of our highest use parks. We are retaining the 10% set aside, as is our normal procedure. The contractor who performed that work for us is doing the ongoing improvements to try to recover the sod to the greatest extent possible. I think what Councilman Przinski laid out is the appropriate course of action, that we get through the busy summer season and we look at a permanent solution in the fall before winter starts. And we do see that the gypsum has made a modest impact. We have applied fumicide to portions of the lawn that were impacted, and we're continuing to look to other improvements.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. That looks like it on council matters, so I'll turn to manager for manager matters.
Again, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, several good news items to report. First, we reported 2 weeks ago how the town of Los Gatos was the one of only 3 jurisdictions in the state of California to receive a double upgrade to its bond rating to the highest possible of AA+. We've also received from ABAG, which is our Association of Bay Area Governments insurance provider, a certificate of appreciation recognizing the city of Los Gatos, we know it's the town of Los Gatos, as a best practices city and also as the most improved city. And that comes with a financial reward to the town of $10,000 to be used for other risk management purposes. So it's one of those certificates that comes with a benefit to the entire community. In addition, our second Saturday program that was initiated by the Chamber of Commerce, supported by the town, was launched this last Saturday very successfully and will be occurring on 2 more second Saturdays in July and August, and we encourage the public's participation. Also related to downtown, since this is our last meeting until August, I did want to report that the San Jose Mercury News will be including in its June 28th edition later this month that downtown Silicon Valley, or downtown Los Gatos, has been voted the best downtown of Silicon Valley for the 6th year in a row.
I'm sorry, I had something ringing in my ear. What did you say?
Downtown Los Gatos has been voted the best downtown of Silicon Valley for the 6th year in a row by the readers of the San Jose Mercury News. Similarly, the Los Gatos Creek Trail is being recognized in the following categories: best walking trail, best mountain biking trail, best place for jogging, and best place to walk your dog. And given that trail is immediately adjacent to most of our industrial parks, our recreation amenities, as well as downtown, I think having the downtown and trail recognition at the same time is a good testament to the town and your leadership over the years.
Thank you very much, Mr. Larson. That concludes council and manager matters. We now turn to consent items. And council, just for your info, we already have, I've got cards to pull consent items 3, 10, 20, and 21. Does council wish to pull any other items besides those? No. Okay, and I have the card pulling those, so we'll hear those after other business. And now I'll look to council for a motion regarding consent items excluding 3, 10, 20, and 21. Councilman Przinski.
Mr. Mayor, I move the recommended action.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Looking for any discussion. Seeing none, all in favor of approving consent items, all the consent items excluding 3, 10, 20, and 21, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, those pass unanimously. Now we're at verbal communications. And like I instructed before, if you wanted to speak at this time, we need you to have submitted a, what do we call this? Beige card. Beige, Pamela? Beige card. Submit one of these cards right here. Fill it out, bring it over to the clerk here, and we will recognize you. Speaking first at the verbal communications portion is Citizen Ray, followed by William Kashub, then Don Waters.
Yes, Mr. Wasserman. I don't understand why I have to lead off every time. Just don't understand it. As a man of the people, I would rather wait and hear from the people and then speak afterwards. However, here we go. First item, the crosswalk at Walgren Drug that I brought up last time, okay? We're hitting a roadblock with the Public Works people, okay? They think putting signs up will do the job. And I'm telling you, there's a tree growing there. It's planted right smack at the curb. And when a person comes up across that crosswalk from Walgren, they're hidden by the tree. And as you drive along there, all of a sudden they step out, and you better be ready with the brakes. You know, just a couple of years ago, 3 blocks away, there was a fellow walking in the crosswalk that was killed, run over. And guess what? After the fact, bulb outs, an extension of the sidewalk, was installed at 2 of them at the intersection where he was killed. After he was killed. So what I'm saying is, let's put a bulb out at the Walgren before somebody is killed. Doesn't that make good sense? I don't know if it makes good sense to the engineering group that doesn't seem to understand public safety. It makes damn good sense to me. Okay? Secondly, under public safety, George Street, a little short cross street, right next to Honda, okay, has 2 intersections there, George and Mitchell, George and Roberts, all right? There is no crosswalk at either intersection, if you can believe it. Fisher School is half a block away. Hundreds of kids on a school day cross back and forth on George, and there isn't 1 ounce of yellow paint. Not one! I can't believe it. Where is the so-called engineering public works group been? We got a new man here that's bringing new thoughts, and I know he's going to be a tiger on this. I know it. Lastly, the corruption at Montecito is just unbelievable. Have you been reading that? Front page in the Weekly Times. A $200,000 award to the city of to the
Thank you, Citizen Ray.
applicants.
Your time is up.
Yeah, may I finish?
Thank you.
Just,
No, you made the point. It's on the front, and $200,000 to the applicants.
Yeah, punitive damages to the mayor
That's it.
of Montecito. Ugly.
Next, we have Mr. Kashub, and then Mr. Waters.
I'm beginning to think that I'm some sort of a regular here. I'm here on Bay Tree. When Bay Tree petitioned the town to convert to a condominium, it was brought under a statute that allowed you to exercise broad discretion in terms of what they were and were not allowed to do. There were the biggest of the exceptions that were granted, as far as the neighbors are concerned, are the exceptions that you made to town ordinances with respect to parking, as it applies to condominiums, and also with respect to below market pricing. I believe that on the below market pricing that this large developer did not deserve, if you look at all of the equities, did not deserve to be to get the relief that he got under BMP. I'm here on short notice because I've been on the East Coast for 3 weeks attending to family matters. As you know, you may know, the Bay Tree apartment house is being painted now. And this is the color that most of the building is. The maroon sort of goes with your shirt, but only a little brighter. Because this is brought under a petition that allows you to exercise broad discretion, and I am aware of the fact that in most cases you don't get involved in colors. But because it's brought under that petition, you can exercise your discretion to make sure that the paint job on that building does not clash with homes in the historic district. All it would take would be a phone call from Mr. Larson or one of you to say, put this on hold because we're getting complaints about the color. The biggest vocal complaint is from the poor guy that just is spending a ton of money on the corner of Almendra to redo that home, and he has accosted the people across the street with respect to the color, objecting to the fact that he's going to have to look at it every day, as are my wife and myself. It is not a color that would show to you that the developer is in any way trying to blend into the neighborhood. It is a color that assaults the neighborhood. So what I would ask you to do is to exercise the discretion that you have under the petition that you granted to approach the developer and put a hold on this paint job. Even one of the painters said, as I was told by a tenant, even one of the painters said, we don't like this color and we will repaint the maroon.
Please finish your thought.
For free.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Could you wait there 1 minute? Ms. Spector?
May I, through you, see if staff has any information in response at this point?
Certainly. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we were aware of some neighborhood concerns regarding this issue. We have reviewed the permit. It is not a regulated item. The color was part of the palette that was originally presented to council. However, as always, staff is willing to contact a developer to see if an accommodation can be made given concerns raised in the neighborhood, and we will certainly do so this week.
Okay. Thank you very much.
I would appreciate anything that you can do.
Thank you. Mr. Waters.
Good evening, Mr. Chairman and Town Council members. My name is Don Waters. I live in Los Gatos at 512 San Benito Avenue. I've lived in Los Gatos all of my life. I'm here tonight to comment about the petition being circulated concerning capital spending limits. We all know that the real purpose of this petition is an attempt by a few renegades of malcontent to derail the building of our new library. Specifically, I am here to beg to you, our town council, to do whatever is necessary to cause the town-issued petition, the petition permit to be withdrawn and to punish those responsible for their illegal activities, perhaps filing an injunction against them. I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. But please, whatever it takes, let's get it done. Now I ask you to bear with me for just a minute and a half. I'm going to ask you to listen to an interview between a fellow Los Gatos citizen and one of the petitioners. It is less than a minute and a half long. While listening, please pay particular attention to the, if not illegal, but disingenuous tactics used by the signature gatherers, including ambiguity, diversion, deceit, evasion, and out-and-out lying. The dialogue is so fast, I have transcribed the audio for you to follow along with.
So tell me about this.
No, we just wanted to...
Put the microphone.
This right here makes it for you voters to decide if y'all want to have another shopping complex here where the city pays for it.
I read an article in the paper about this one, didn't I?
Did you?
Well, I don't know. Maybe this isn't the one.
Well, there's two of them going on right now in this town. The one is term limits.
There was one about the library. There's one that said something about the library.
Yeah.
Term limits is the one about the library?
No. Okay. This one is.
Oh, okay. So this is the one that we won't build the new library if we pass this?
Well, no. What you won't do is build a shopping center.
Oh, so this doesn't have anything to do with the library?
That's a whole bunch of politics. You know what I'm saying? On the opposition side, trying to propaganda.
So that's not true?
No, it's not.
The library's going to get built?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
No,
This is not about the library?
No, it's not. But that's what they try to use.
Okay.
But it's just to get on the ballot. And it's spending limits. Every other city has a spending limit.
Every city in California?
No, in Santa Clara County except for 3 cities. Los Gatos, Morgan Hill, and Gilroy.
Okay. Let me just read it. Make sure it's right. Okay, so I can sign this, and our library still gets built?
Yes, yes.
Okay, that's important.
Sign it, and our library still gets built. Again, all I ask is that you consider and do something to resolve this matter as soon as possible. It is urgent. Thank you for your time, and thank you for your Herculean efforts to make our new library a reality. You make me proud to be a Luscatan. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Waters. Seeing no other cards, I will close the verbal communications portion of tonight's hearing, and we'll move on to public hearing, agenda item number 22, adopt resolution overruling objections and ordering hazardous vegetation abatement. And I believe I turned to Mr. Todd Capurso. Mr. Larson, you've got something to say first?
Sure. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, actually, given the length of tonight's agenda, Mr. Capurso is available to answer any questions the council or public may have. And we also wanted to introduce Ms. Julie Linney, who's here from the Santa Clara Fire Department, serving the town of Los Gatos as well.
Thank you very much. Council, any questions of staff based on the staff report that you received and reviewed over the weekend? Seeing none, and we have no cards on 22 either. So we will close that portion. I'll look to Town Council for a discussion and a motion. Council Member Przinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'll move to adopt the resolution overruling objections and ordering hazardous vegetation abatement. Brush.
Second.
Is this 23 as well? Okay, we have Mr. Larson. Got it. Thank you. We have a motion. We have a second. Any discussion based on the motion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? None. Thank you. 22 passes unanimously. And thank you very much for coming this evening. All righty. And we're now on to 23, which is to consider an appeal of a planning commission decision denying the construction of a single-family residence on vacant property. And the property location in question is 20105 Foster Road. I did want to. Thank you very much. We're going to take a 2-minute break. We're going to take a 2-minute break, so just stay tuned. Thank you. back into session, and before we proceed to 23, which I read the title of for a minute ago, I've made a mistake under verbal communications. Our last speaker, Mr. Waters, I neglected to notice Mr. Larson, our town manager, had a comment to make. So I want to turn to Mr. Larson for a moment.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, as reported in item 25 on your agenda, which we'll be getting to later tonight, there have been many allegations made both in prior council meetings tonight and directly to staff and through the media about inappropriate campaign behavior. Misleading information and untruths in the solicitation of signatures or in campaign matters can be criminally investigated by the district attorney's office. Any evidence of such or any reports of such activity should be reported to the police department, who coordinates the town's efforts with the district attorney.
Thank you. So does this count, Mr. Larson, as a reporting of?
The police chief was present. Usually it requires a reporting party to come in and file a report with the police department, which is located here at the Civic Center.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move on to agenda item number 23. Which again is the property located at 20105, and this is an appeal. They're asking the town council to consider an appeal of the planning commission decision denying the construction of a single-family residence on vacant property at 20105 Foster Road. We're going to start off with a staff report by Suzanne Davis. Take it away, Ms. Davis. It's like summer vacation.
Excuse me. This is an historic photo of the former Guadalupe College that was previously on this property. The subject property is located at the top of Foster Road. It is one of 6 hillside lots within the McCarthy Plan development. The PD was approved by the council in 2001. In January 2004, the town adopted the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines. There was some discussion whether this project should be specifically exempted from application of the Hillside Development Standards and Guidelines, and at that time the council decided no, with the exception of the McCarthy residence, which was already in the process, that the other lots would be subject to the document. We're looking at lot number 3. The building area is the area closest to lot 2. And there are 2 assessors parcels that comprise this property, but it is one building site. There have been 3 homes approved within the plan development: the McCarthy residence on lot 5 and the Brady residence on lot 2, which is currently under construction nearing completion. That particular residence did receive a exception for height. They have a skylight element that is about 20 feet 6 inches at the highest point, and this is a skylight that comes up to a point, so it's less than 1% of the roof area. It is part of a passive heating and cooling system, and the Planning Commission did grant an exception for that one element to exceed the 18 feet. The majority of the house is actually lower than 18 feet. They have a couple of roof peaks at that height. And then there's also a spec home that was approved on lot 6 that may or may not be built, but it is approved and it was held to 18 feet. The applicant's site is 2.5 acres. And as I mentioned previously, there are 2 APNs, but we just have one development site, one building site. We are considering an application for architecture and site approval for a new residence. The application hasn't been deemed complete. We had 2 elements, a landscape plan that wasn't provided and a grading and drainage plan that wasn't complete, but we had the issue of whether the house should be 1 or 2 stories and 18 feet or 25 feet, and we moved it forward to the commission for determination on that particular issue. Staff has included conditions of approval requiring those 2 plans to be completed in as part of the package before the project moves forward to building permits, should it be approved this evening. The application was originally considered by the Planning Commission on March 11th, and the Commission continued it to April 22nd and directed the applicant to redesign to a 1-story, not to exceed 18-foot house. The property owners preferred the 2-story design and did not wish to make any changes, so they returned to the Planning Commission on April 22nd, and the Commission denied the application at that time. So the proposal is for a two-story, 25-foot-high residence with attached garage. The house is 5,531 square feet. The garage is 839 square feet for a total of 6,370. 6,400 is the maximum allowed on this property. The applicant's position is that less than 25% of the downhill-facing elevation will be visible from the viewing platform at Los Gatos Boulevard and Blossom Hill Road. And they have provided a number of photo simulations showing that, and that was provided to council with the reports. We did a number of technical reviews with this project. The geotechnical and environmental reviews were done with the plan development, so those did not have to be repeated, but we did an arborist review and architectural review for this particular project, and then reviewed the hillside development standards and guidelines. Staff considerations in reviewing the project were past approvals within the plan development, past actions on hillside homes since adoption of the hillside development standards and guidelines, concerns about visibility of hillside homes stated by Commission and Council, and the desire to have homes blend with their surroundings, present a low profile, and minimize visual impact. We did have a couple of neighborhood concerns. Those were privacy and visual impact, and those were from an adjacent neighbor. So the discussion topics this evening are visibility, visual impact and privacy concerns, and compliance with the hillside development standards and guidelines. That is a photo from the viewing platform looking up at the site, and there is orange netting up there. It is pretty hard to detect from this view. I have one I can pass around if you'd like to see it when closer. The council options tonight are to either deny the appeal and the architecture and site application, or to grant the appeal, and there's two options. If you grant the appeal, it can be returned to the Planning Commission, or it can be approved with conditions. That concludes the staff report. I'm available if you have any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Davis. Council, any questions of staff? Seeing none, we'll now turn to the applicant, and when you start speaking, you will have 10 minutes. So please come on forward.
Well, first of all, I really thank you for...
Would you bring that microphone down to you, Mr. Singh? Thank you very much.
Now the time is ticking now. First of all, I really thank you, the councilman and councilwoman, to take time talking to me and meet me. And through that process, I understand some, or you can relieve some of my frustrations. And today, okay, in front of you, my team's gonna present our side of the story, and I truly believe, and my house is not visible. Okay. Now, first, let me have our architecture, Eugene. Okay.
Thank you, Michael. Good evening, honorable council members and Mayor Wasserman. My name is Eugene Sakai, and I'm Michael Singh's architect. As we will soon show, Mr. Singh's house, as proposed, is less than 25% visible from every named viewing platform on the valley floor, as well as from the other unnamed platforms that were presented to the Planning Commission on April 22nd. Our firm worked very hard to achieve this limited visibility, and I would like to share with you a bit of that design process. Mr. Singh had an uncommonly well-developed sense of his program and space planning before we came on board. It was our job to refine Michael's conceptual plans while developing his home's massing, form, and site plan. Among the things we attempted to achieve were the four following. Number one, a balanced design with a careful use of proportion and scale. We opted for what we are calling a contemporary prairie-style house inspired by the low-pitched hip roofs, informal space planning, and relationship to the site pioneered by Frank Lloyd Wright. We were pleased that our design approach was validated by the town's consulting architect, Mr. Larry Cannon, who stated in his report to staff that our project was well designed. Mr. Cannon had only one minor design suggestion, which has since been folded into our design. Mr. Cannon consults in many other jurisdictions and is well known among architects, including myself, for being very discriminating with his approvals. Number two, using primary and subordinate volumes and low-sloping hipped roofs to reduce the visual bulk of the house. It should be noted that of the 94 feet of the building elevation facing the valley floor, only 19 feet of this profile is at the 25-foot high mark. Number 3, environmentally sensitive design. As a LEED accredited professional, I try to encourage our clients to incorporate as many green features into their projects as possible. With Mr. Singh, there was little need for encouragement, as he shares our firm's commitment towards reducing environmental impacts. As noted in the staff report, we expect that our design will best the minimum green point certification level of 50 by over 80 points. Number 4, reducing visibility from the valley floor through careful site planning. As noted in the staff report, the hillside design standards and guidelines includes the following standard, quote, reduce visual impact. The visual impact of buildings or portions of buildings that can be seen from the viewing platform shall be mitigated to the greatest extent possible by reducing the height of the building or moving the structure to another location on the site. And that's from Chapter 2, Section C4. And this is something that we did in our site planning. Although Mr. Singh's initial calculations show that his house, if located in the center of the pad, would be less than 25% visible from every platform due to the site's heavy tree cover and terrain, we made every effort to site the house to further reduce visibility from the valley floor. Using 3D terrain modeling tools, we determined that visibility could be reduced even further by pushing the house south, away from the valley floor or closer to Foster Road. The compact two-story footprint of the house allowed us to nestle the house very close to the street while still allowing for the required fire truck turnaround. This had the dual benefit of creating a larger backyard while reducing the home's visibility from the valley floor. Once the story poles were installed according to our site plan, we found that the visibility was in fact reduced well below 25%. And I believe it is worth mentioning that these site adjustments were done voluntarily prior to our submitting our planning application initially in January of 2009. The site is unique in that it has tremendous views to the north, one of the primary reasons Mr. Singh selected this site over many others he considered both in this town and others. Due to the north-south orientation of the coast mountain ranges, many view sites in the Bay Area have east or west-facing views, which creates a serious problem with heat gain through the picture windows. Our project's major site constraint is its relative narrowness in the east-west direction. Mr. Cannon's suggested layout for a one-story house illustrates why a two-story house makes the most sense for this site, as the narrowness forces an L-shaped plan that eats into the backyard, fails to respond to the view, and creates a number of west-facing picture windows subject to afternoon heat gain. In conclusion, I hope this brief chronicle has given you a sense of how much careful thought and consideration has gone into this design proposal on our part as well as Mr. Singh's. Unlike many development applications I'm sure you've seen, ours is a relatively conservative plan that represents our best effort, one that we believe is in full compliance with the town ordinances, and one that we feel should not require extensive whittling down or carving away to obtain approvals. Thank you again for your time and attention. And now I'd like to introduce Bill Kioki, Mr. Singh's good friend and project sponsor.
Thank you, Eugene. Yes, I am a friend of Michael's and have been assisting him with this process as the applicant. First, I do want to thank each council member for meeting with Michael. We weren't able to meet with Barbara, but that's all right. We did try and just didn't happen. Your willingness to meet and to listen to our thoughts and concerns has helped in many ways, including help calm what had up to this point become an increasingly frustrating process for Mr. and Mrs. Singh. So again, thank you for being accessible, for listening, and for sharing with us your opinions and advice. My role this evening is to review the graphical facts and evidence that have been prepared by the architect, and that is required as part of the hillside standards and guidelines for evaluating the visibility of proposed two-story homes in the hillside area. As we have all heard since we were kids, a picture is worth 1,000 words, so I figured these pictures weren't taking a look at. It's my objective over the next few minutes to show you a series of photos and photo simulations of the proposed house on the building site from various viewing locations. All of these photos, except this first one, were provided by the town's planning staff. I'd also like to point out, before I move on to that, the letter from Joe McCarthy does talk about visibility and the process that is laid out in the standards and guidelines regarding visibility, and the fact that there was no preemptive kind of visibility decision made for the plan development. As you know, the Singh's proposed house is visible from only one of the town's named viewing platforms, and then only 13%. And that 13% is only about half of what's specified in the hillside standards and guidelines as the allowable amount that can be seen before a house is deemed visible and must be limited to 18 feet. In other words, the amount of the house that is currently visible from this one named platform could be nearly doubled, that's 2x, before it would be deemed visible according to the standards. So this first photo was taken at Los Gatos Boulevard and Blossom Hill, and the box indicates where it is. Quality's not great, but you can see the orange netting up at the top. It's a series of photos. Oh, the right white button. Okay. Okay. And so here we are with a profile of the house laid out. And then we scale it back and bring the existing foliage forward. And then we bring the foliage further forward to make it opaque. And then we do the calculations. So using pretty advanced software, they're able to calculate this fairly accurately, and it's 13%. Again, this is the one named platform at Los Gatos Boulevard and Blossom Hill. The next site was Los Gatos Boulevard at the Acura dealership, a little further south from the named platform. And again, moving through these, the house scaling back, bringing the foliage forward, 8% visibility from the Acura. So, you can imagine the geometry, the trigonometry. It's been a long time since I took trigonometry, but as we obviously move forward, the angle of viewing angle becomes steeper, and therefore the trees and terrain become more prominent. The next location was Los Gatos Boulevard in Leroy. And again, moving through these, the house blending, bringing the foliage forward, doing the calculation. Was that 10 minutes?
Thank you. Yep. Your time is up, Mr. Chochi. You'll have 5 minutes after we hear from the public. If you want to conclude what you're doing at that time, you can use that. Thank you. We now have speaker cards regarding agenda item 23. The first is Noel Cross, followed by Citizen Ray, then John Brady. You each have up to 3 minutes.
Hi, my name is Noel Cross. I'm the architect for the Brady project right next door. Frankly, we're pretty surprised this is even here. The one thing that his advanced software hasn't taken into account is what we were told when we first researched the ordinances with Suzanne and Sandy Bailey, that we were not allowed to use the trees to block the building. And when I made the same arguments when we designed our first project, and we were told in no uncertain terms by staff that the trees aren't meant to be used to block the house. They've consistently said that all along, and there was absolutely no confusion about that. So it's perplexing why we're even here. And one of the things that Mr. Singh said in the Planning Commission hearing was that he had done his homework, and we really, nothing could be further from the truth. Before Mr. Brady even closed on his property, we had done several designs, met with staff 3 or 4 times, and gone over all the designs. And again, we pushed our point about the height. We only wanted a 1-story house, but we just wanted that one section to be a little bit taller. And we were told in no uncertain terms that we needed to limit it to the 18 feet. And so there was absolutely no confusion about that fact. And other than, the design of the house, which, I'm going to have to be as kind as I can possibly be, but it's not a good design. It's not good architecture. It's a ranch house designed in prairie clothing. and doesn't even have the whole outfit. And it just breaks my heart. We've worked so hard on that house. We've been under construction now for a year and a half, and we've just painstakingly gone over every detail. And we designed the house knowing that the rest of the houses in the neighborhood were going to be one story. And it just breaks my heart to see something like this even being considered, because it's not good architecture. It's just a building. It was obviously designed by the homeowner and drafted up by the architect, and not really designed by an architect. The privacy is the biggest issue. Their house is about 50 feet away from our house. Their property is 6 feet higher than ours, and their windows are somewhere between 16 and 20 feet above grade for this one office that's got glass on 5 facets of, it's like an octagonal shaped room, and it's an office, and it's facing, you know, I mean, he talked about good passive solar design. It's facing south and west, and it's just going to get blasted with heat, but more importantly, it's looking right down on our project. And, you know, any time of day or night, he could be sitting up there and looking right down into their master suite. So,
Thank you, Mr. Cross. Your time is up.
Request that you be consistent.
Appreciate that. Citizen Ray. And then Mr. John Brady.
Yes, indeed. I'm here before you again, just as I appeared before you on DeSantis. The issue was to save the mountain, all right, from the bulldozers, from monster, flatland, square box, 2-story, uglier than sin on the mountainside home. Unbelievable that this guy here, where is he? I don't see him, has the guts to come here and to tell you all it's what he wants is all that matters. I cannot believe it. Any reasonable human being knows that a given community has community values expressed in all their public documents, okay? The public documents of Los Gatos say, on the mountain, development will be subsidiary to Mother Nature. There will be a blending of the architecture with Mother Nature. Now, on this property, you remember there was this huge girls' school cement that was taken down. And in the process, flat lots were left, okay? So what do you do with a flat lot on the mountainside? You build it with a home that blends, because you're going to plant all kinds of beautiful native shrubs all around that house, okay? And you're going to recreate Mother Nature. If you have any soul, okay, if you care about Los Gatos, if you care about this wonderful mountain we have with no name, so I say, and if you care about the Planning Commission, the Planning Commission said, okay, if you approve this like you did DeSantis, why bother with the Planning Commission? Well, you have no homeowner association here because everybody gets wasted. Nobody listens. Except one guy. There's one guy left. And are you listening? We'll see. Thank you.
We now have Mr. John Brady, followed by Richard McCarthy.
Mayor, Vice Mayor, Councilman, Councilwoman, staff, and Chief. My name is John Brady. I am the owner, along with my wife, of the home at 20103 Foster Road. We are the proud owners of this property. We anticipate moving in within a month or so. We have labored extremely hard and diligently over these past 18 months, and we're thrilled with the end product. I hope you see it soon. I sincerely wish that I didn't have to be here tonight. I resent the stress that it's going to cause between me and Mr. Singh. I have only been the victim of his aggressiveness in trying to get me to support his project, and I resent that. Months ahead of closing, we hired a team of experts to lead and advise us through the design and permitting process of a building home on this site. Our expert team worked closely with town staff, and we ultimately designed a building that virtually met all the requirements and regulations of the town of Los Gatos, including the hillside development standards and guidelines, most specifically the 18-foot clear height limitation, I should say, and single-story structures. Through this very effective process, as Noel mentioned, there was no confusion on our part at any time pertaining to the application of hillside regulations on this property. We also appreciate the seller, Joe McCarthy, who made it perfectly clear to me that the entire Vineyard Heights plan development was subject to the hillside limitations. I'll conclude my comments with 3 points, the first being that we purchased our property and paid a huge premium to enjoy the protection of hillside regulations on all the lots around us. We complied with these same regulations on every piece and part of our project with the full knowledge, again, that all of the projects in our development would be required to comply as well. Finally, and most concerning to me, I think it's materially unfair to apply a differing standard to another property owner in the same plan development. There should be no loopholes for anyone. I trust that in your wisdom you'll deny this appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Brady. If you'll stay there for just a moment.
You bet.
Council, any questions, Mr. Brady? I have one for you, if I may, and it may seem a little harsh, but we're at the final decision point here, so that's what we do. In listening to you and speaking with Mr. Singh before, in looking at the photos, seeing what's visible from various angles of his house, your house, and you talk about applying similar rules to both. Yours certainly was single story, 18-foot, 19-foot, whatever it was. And each person, of course, is certainly entitled to build a home on their property. What are your thoughts about the visibility of your home versus the proposed visibility of Mr. Singh's home?
Well, I wished my house were more visible. I wish I had a greater view of the valley floor. We look, more due north than the angled lot that Mr. Singh has. But my view of the restrictions is that we determined complying with them was the only course of action for us to take, and so we followed the staff design leads and accommodated those. This also took into account that the homes around us would also be subject to the same height limitation, and we relied on that as we looked to finish our design. But I don't, my total focus has been on our lot, our property. I looked at the pictures that were shown, and the only thing I couldn't see was my house. Easier to see his. So I just find myself amazed that we're actually standing here with this. I'm hopeful that, there isn't a loophole or some, legal lawyering manipulation of a definition that works against me in this regard. This is a very serious matter to us.
Thank you. I was out there on Saturday and Sunday, and the craftsmanship on your home is beautiful.
Thank you.
And I can understand your desire to move in soon. As I reviewed back your project and the history on this one, I understood why the height limitation applied to your lot with the visibility and the necessity for a single story. And I see your lot and Mr. Singh's lot as two different issues depending on where you're viewing from. So I was very interested and glad to see you here this night just to get your perspective and to have the opportunity to ask you these questions straight up.
Well, my greatest concern is looking at a monolithic structure that's 25, 30 feet away from my property line that is 30 feet higher than my ground level.
And you're referring to the west side of his property?
You bet.
Closest to yours. Okay, thank you very much.
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Mayor?
Oh, excuse me, we have one more question. Councilmember Brzezinski.
Mr. Brady, I just want to clarify one thing that your architect indicated, that from the beginning you were told that there would be an 18-foot limit, and if I got him correctly, you wanted a one-story house with a taller element, and that's what you were asking for?
Well, initially, I had plans for more square footage, greater coverage. I had plans for a more dramatic and higher roof line. We contemplated 2 stories, but based on the advice of my experts, they said don't waste your time or energy, so then we contemplated building a basement or a cellar, and I think that's not good space. I don't think it's very usable, very livable, so we opted to not do that. Then we slowly grew more and more in love with this design concept we had. We think it's incredibly unique. It's certainly creative. You won't find another home like it out there. It's contemporary, not modern. Our finishes are just tops. We're so proud of it.
Yeah, I will say, and maybe just to confirm, I was at your property over the weekend, visited the site twice, and did have the opportunity to speak with the applicant as well. So I think that perhaps, even though it's been acknowledged already, I wanted to make sure that that was on public record.
You bet.
Thank you. That razor wire is sharp, isn't it? Yeah. All right. Thank you very much. Mr. McCarthy, Richard.
I'm Rich McCarthy, and I'm speaking on behalf of my uncle, Joe McCarthy, who couldn't be here tonight. Joe's the original developer of the property, and as Ms. Davis summarized, the PD was originally approved in 2001. This was before the passage of the Hillside Guidelines. In 2004, when the Hillside Guidelines were adopted, it was determined, as Ms. Davis had summarized, that 5 of the 6 lots would be subject to those Hillside Guidelines. At no time during the original PD approval or the Hillside Guidelines were there any determinations made as to whether any of these individual lots or the future development of the homes would be deemed visible. It's my understanding in reading the guidelines, the purpose and intent of these Hillside Guidelines are to protect the hillside and the community of Los Gatos and the feel that community has. And the Hillside Guidelines themselves set forth a specific and quantifiable mechanism for determining visibility. And all of these, the Hillside Guidelines are important both for the town and preserving that character of the town, but they also need to be carefully weighed against the rights of individual property owners. So what I'm asking Town Council to do tonight is to confirm these quantifiable measures and to ensure that there's a means and a method for determining whether a home is visible, and this should be applicable to the town and all of its property owners. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. McCarthy. Seeing no questions, thank you very much. And that concludes the cards we have, so we'll close the public portion of that. And Mr. Singh's team, Mr. Chiochi, whoever you wish to send back up, you have up to 5 minutes to conclude your presentation.
Okay. I'll be quick. Where are we? Okay. Leroy Avenue. All right. This was from Glen Ridge, and I do want to point out this photo because the red box, shows the netting for the Singh's house, and the house on the right is the Brady's house, and there is a very significant and distinct difference between the visibility of these two houses. Again, we did calculations from this direction, and we determined that 17% was visible from Glen Ridge. We've got some additional photos. I'm going to move through the Wood Road because there was some confusion as to the suitability and applicability of these photos. So we didn't do calculations on those, so I'm going to go past those. These are photos from the site. Most of you have been there, so I'm going to just show these briefly. I took these photos. I'm standing at the rear of the proposed house at the structure itself. I'm 6'2", and that's the level at which I took the photo. This is what you would see from the edge of the house. That's a zoomed picture, again standing from the edge of the proposed house. That's from the back of the lot on the flat pad, and no, those aren't crop circles. Looking down at a lower pad in the valley. And then I simply turned around and took a photo of the nets. I'm assuming all of you made it out there, but I did want to show that. In summary, we believe that the photos and the visibility calculations are very clear and compelling in support of the Singh's proposed family home. And although many words have been said tonight, but perhaps not 1,000 by me, we are seeking one word from each town council member tonight, and that is simply yes. Yes, that you agree based on all the facts germane to this matter, including and in particular the photos and simulations that I have shared this evening, that Michael and Sharon Singh should be allowed to proceed and complete the development of their plans and the construction of their new family home. That concludes my portion. I'm going to turn it over to Todd Williams, Mr. Singh's attorney.
Thank you, Bill, and good evening, council members. I'll be brief. My name is Todd Williams, and I'm a land use attorney. I've only been recently retained by Mr. Singh, so I've been playing a little catch-up over the last week and a half or so. And I regret I haven't had the opportunity to meet you, but I've had some good discussions with the city attorney, and I also wanted to give my appreciation to Ms. Davis for providing some documents that I was asking for very quickly, and that was great. I've had a chance to I also have represented and do currently represent towns, cities, and counties, so I understand the difficulty with applying these types of ordinances and the tough job that staff and planning commissioners have. In reviewing this record, the staff reports, the planning commission hearings, my point in speaking is to just point out that the process that was followed by the planning commission, I think, is legally suspect. And did not rise to the level of being a legal proceeding. The substance of how the commission was how the process was handled, the findings that were made, and the evidence that purportedly supported those findings, I think, are all lacking, and would make, as it stands, the approval under that determination subject to challenge under 1094.5 of the Civil Procedure Code. This is actually a very straightforward appeal based on the facts presented. The Planning Commission denied the application essentially on one ground, that it didn't comply with the visibility standard contained in the view analysis of the guidelines. Unfortunately, that finding was unsupported when made. It's now been wholly rebutted by the evidence that's been presented by the applicant. There's no dispute that the house is more than 25% visible from the existing viewpoints or the newly identified viewpoints. As such, the findings aren't supported. So for those reasons alone, the appeal should be granted and the site application should be approved. There are some other compelling reasons, both legal and policy, for which to grant the appeal. I've submitted a letter, and I'm running out of time, so I'll just go through a few very, very quickly, which is, in adopting these guidelines, the council declared that they will help provide clear direction to developers and homeowners processing development applications, citing General Plan Strategy L17.4. And these are contained in the resolution that adopted the guidelines. And essentially, the process that was followed here, just to remind the council, was that there was no advance notice given to the applicant that there were going to be new viewpoints that were going to be identified. Those photos weren't mentioned in the staff report to the Planning Commission. They weren't attached as exhibits. They were presented for the first time at the hearing, and there was no opportunity for them to rebut those.
Thank you, Mr. Williams. Your time is up. Council, any questions of Mr. Williams? Yes, we have one from Vice Mayor McNutt, or perhaps more than one.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not sure whether this question is for Mr. Williams or for Mr. Korb, but you've just given us a 16-page document that we've not had a chance to read. I see there's some attachments, so it's really only maybe 8 pages of your material.
Yes.
Okay. Is this a restatement of the material and the arguments that have been made previously, or is there new information? If there's new information, Mr. Korb, do we take a break? Do we continue this matter? How do we handle that?
It's entirely up to council. This information has been submitted for the first time in this proceeding. It wasn't submitted in advance as other items are, to give the council an opportunity to review it. My best advice would be to continue the matter and review whatever you think is necessary to review, if your inclination is to take this evidence or take these arguments into question. These are arguments, not evidence. I think you've seen the evidence.
Thank you. Further questions, Ms. McNutt? No? Yes? Did you have a question? No? Did you have a further question, Vice Mayor?
Well, yeah, okay, yes.
Okay,
Thank
please
you.
go right ahead.
Thank you. So, Mr. Williams, I will ask you if this is a restatement of previous material or if there's something new here that we need to consider.
I think that this is largely a restatement of material that you've already seen in maybe serial or seriatim form in some of the other letters. The summary of this letter and the bottom line is just to be on the record that our position is that the Planning Commission hearing failed to comply with the law. Beyond that, the reasons are set out in the letter, but are essentially ones that the staff report and the other letters have made clear, dealing with the view analysis issue, as well as there was an issue regarding the trees and whether they could or couldn't be used. And I think that issue in particular was addressed in the Planning Commission hearing by the city attorney.
Okay, thank you very much.
Honorable Mr. Brzezinski, did you have your, no? Councilmember Spector, Honorable Spector.
Thank you, Honorable Mayor. First of all, in looking, I have not had a chance to chat with you, but I did talk with with Mr. Singh this afternoon. In looking at the photo studies that were provided to us, just to be clear, the greenery that is in front of the proposed building, that greenery is on an adjoining downhill property. Is that correct?
That's correct.
All right. And in my reading of the hillside standards that the staff provided to us on the report, there is one standard that states that landscape screening is not an alternative to reducing building height or selecting a less visible site. And then in your own binder, you have given us under tab 1 a portion of the hillside standards that discusses vegetation. But that discussion of vegetation applies to vegetation on the subject property. So my question goes more to the vegetation as screening. As I read the standards, vegetation as screening is not appropriate to determine whether a home should be 1-story or 2-story, and I wanted to give you the opportunity to address that issue.
Great, thank you. I'd be happy to. I think there's 2 points here. One is the specific standard that you're talking about, I believe it relates to landscaping that the applicant would be adding to the parcel. And so the idea is you may have a wholly visible site, but then you come to the council and say, well, I'm going to plant 100 trees in front of it, therefore deem me not visible. That's not what's happening here, and we're not relying on that in order to, there will certainly be landscaping that may soften these views even more, but in terms of determining visibility under the guidelines, we're not relying on any to-be planted landscaping. The critical standard that relates to trees is one that concerned and I think in some ways confused perhaps the Planning Commission, which was in the guidelines, it speaks of trees and whether trees or vegetation would be removed, pruned, or damaged by construction. And so if you're not going to be able to rely on trees that you're going to tear down or that are going to be destroyed during construction. But you are allowed, and the city attorney clarified this over 3 pages of the Planning Commission minutes, pages 20 to 22, saying that those under the standards, you may rely on off-site trees and vegetation to be part of your screen for the house. The guidelines don't require you to go through a fiction of if the entire hillside was devoid of vegetation, would you be visible? Everyone would be visible. Rather, it says you're allowed to rely on what is there and what will not be impacted by construction. And the trees that are in part providing this shielding are on a lot in an area that may not be developed, that it cannot be developed. And the arborist report, which is cited in the staff report, states that these trees are viable and that there's no reason why they won't function as screening trees for the foreseeable future.
Ms. Spector, please continue.
Thank you. I did read the minutes of the Planning Commission meeting, so I am aware of the exchange between the town staff and the planning commissioners. But as I read Exhibit A to your tab 1, and it talking about trees being removed, torn down, or impacted by construction, as I read that, it has to, by definition, be referring to trees on the subject site, or else things like tearing them down, pruning them, or ruining them by construction would not make any sense. Also, there would be a difficulty with having the applicant or the town prohibit pruning, tearing down, destroying, or impacting with construction trees on adjoining sites. So again, these are issues of concern to me. As I said, as I read your Exhibit A, I think it applies to greenery, trees on the subject site, not an adjoining site. And since this is an issue of concern to me, I want to give you every opportunity to address it.
Right. Well, I guess I would just reiterate what I've said. I understand on this site there are trees that are on the, trying to get my orientation correctly, I guess the eastern side of the site, which are in, again, an undevelopable area of the land that certainly provides some screening from that direction, as well as the trees that are in front. And I think that there's, I would respectfully disagree with your interpretation of that particular standard, that it doesn't somehow allow one to consider off-site trees. Certainly you can have construction that might potentially affect off-site vegetation because of shadowing or disturbing of roots or et cetera. And so I think the meaning of that standard relates to and is drafted so that an applicant is not relying on vegetation that his or her construction is going to damage. Here, the only thing that's being relied on are existing trees on another site and on the applicant's site that are not going to be disturbed at all by construction. And so I think that particular standard essentially has no relevance in this application, because there is nothing that's going, there are no trees that are going to be damaged by construction.
Okay, thank you for that. Mr. Williams, before you sit down, I've got a question for you. It ties back into a comment that Mr. Sakai made earlier, where he made the statement about mitigated to the greatest extent possible. And I believe when he was making that reference, it kind of tied into one of my concerns. We have the guidelines. Each and every lot is different. The angles are different. The opportunities are different. The limitations are different. So for me, comparing to next door, comparing to 10 years ago, isn't really relevant. What's relevant to me today is your client's application. And I feel very strongly about the comment that Mr. Sakai made, that when he spoke about mitigated to the greatest extent possible. And towards that end, as I look at the subject property, I too shared what Councilmember Spector said about the trees that are blocking reportedly 85% of the view right now, majority of which aren't on Mr. Singh's property. So that's a whole different issue and to be interpreted to each person's satisfaction. But when you mitigate to the greatest extent possible, this 25% number, to me, that's in the guidelines and that's a maximum. Okay? That's a maximum. It says not to exceed 25%. It doesn't mean to me that 24% is good. Okay? I'm speaking as one council member. So I look at the existing plan. I walked there. I walked the site. I saw where the two homes were located. I looked at the size of the land each of them has. And I looked at that, and I looked at the west side of the proposed home, the two-story element, the elevation above the home next door. Forgive me, Mr. Brady, I believe, Mr. Brady's house. and I saw the privacy concern. I looked at the pictures, one of which that was up there on the PowerPoint that showed an 87% concealed or 13% visible. And the lion's share of that 13%, again, seemed to be the west side of the home. So I started thinking, mitigate to the greatest extent possible. And for me, two things popped into my mind. I wanted to bounce them off you, get your feedback, and unless there's any other council questions, then council will discuss this thing, and that's how we'll proceed tonight. So with mitigating to the greatest extent possible and looking at the west side of the home that's closest to the Brady's and the west side of the home that is the lion's share of the 13% that's visible, I'm thinking some trees, some landscaping up there, okay, to screen that. I'm thinking that second-story element up there could come down, L out, could be put somewhere else. I don't know if it's kids' bedrooms or master bedrooms or what it is. Bedrooms are typically upstairs. But I look at that west second floor, and to me, that seems to be the big issue. That's at least half of what's visible. So if it was screened, that would get rid of half my concern. I can tell you, regardless of what the guidelines say, up to 25%, for me, the best designed home is one that is not visible, okay, from various view sheds. I've lived here for 35 years. There's nothing I love more than looking up into our hills and seeing hills, okay? The structure that Mr. McCarthy took down, I thank him for that. Thank your uncle for that, okay? I appreciate that. Now what we're putting back there is what's before us today. So if you could please respond to, one, the idea of screening trees, screening that west end, and two, the idea of that second floor, because the second floor is an issue here. Visibility is an issue here. Privacy is an issue here. And almost all those things apply to the second floor west end.
Sure. I will respond, and then I want to at least give our architect a chance to respond. Please. Because I've been involved 0% on the design of the home. But let me address a couple of things that you said. One is, I think we want to be clear about the effect of the Hillside guidelines and standards. And it was basically my first question when I asked, when I called up Mr. Korb and said, you know, what are these exactly? Where do they fit in the universe? And the guidelines themselves talk about them in concert with the general plan, specific plans, the zoning ordinance. These were adopted by the council after a 3-year planning process by resolution. And so they stand in that same arena, if you will, obviously beneath the general plan, but in conformity with it. And they set forth certain lines. They set forth certain parameters, some of which are mandatory, and some of which do define and shape and limit the council's discretion. And clearly that was in part because of the years of controversy with Hillside development here and the concerns about wanting to preserve that. So with that as context, the visible home, it's not no more than, it's a single-family residence where 25% or more of an elevation can be seen from any of the town's established viewing platforms. That's the definition. So it's, if you are below 25%, you are not, quote-unquote, visible under this 70 pages of guidelines. Here, there's no evidence that his home is, quote-unquote, visible under this ordinance. Now, getting to your point, I think with respect to the screening, and certainly the architect can talk about this, while screening can't be used to get you into the not visible category, it certainly can be used to address privacy concerns, to soften, issues that may come up between neighbors, and I suspect that those, plans are in the works. I don't want to comment on what can or can't be done to the home. That's just beyond, where I'm at. But I think it's important to remember that these guidelines were, again, developed after a 3-year planning process, numerous meetings, and they are meant to not only guide the applicants, they're meant to guide the council, and they're meant to give the public a better understanding of how things will be evaluated. And I think they do, to the extent that they are standards, shape the discretion that the council has in terms of how it evaluates projects.
I appreciate that. And as 4 of the 5 of us on this council approved those guidelines and standards. We are very familiar with them. Right. But as you understood in your conversation with Mrs. Spector a few minutes ago, there's many things that are subject to interpretation. There's many phrases such as mitigated to the greatest extent possible. What does that mean?
Absolutely.
And so that's that gray area that we're in, and I would like to hear from Mr. Sakai on the second story.
And the one thing I will add is, and I believe this is the case, that this home is within the LRDA of the site, and so I think they've already made gone into some lengths to make sure that the home is properly positioned. But
which it must be.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Barring an exception. Right.
Well, Mayor, I appreciate the chance to elaborate on that catchphrase, greatest extent possible, because I think it is an important one. But before I do that, I wanted to acknowledge my appreciation for Mr. Brady and his architect's position. I particularly appreciate their passion for their project and their design. And I just wanted to say that in working with my client, he shares an equal passion and love for his own design. And to speak in very broad terms, that's one of the true enjoyments of being an architect is helping clients be able to achieve their dream homes. And in this particular case, although as Mr. Brady's architect said that the taste and the style of this home may not be his, this happens to be Mr. Singh's. And so, I'd like you to keep that in mind as you deliberate the merits of this application. So getting back to the issue of what is the greatest extent possible, I think that's a very excellent point. Taken to its logical conclusion, one could argue that perhaps Mr. Singh should consider doing a home that's half the size with a basement, but for many of the same reasons that Mr. Brady did not want to do a home with a basement, Mr. Singh doesn't want to do a one-story home with a basement either. And it's, again, as our attorney has pointed out, it's our reading and our understanding of the Hillside Guidelines that Mr. Singh's site is materially different than Mr. Brady's, and as such offers more flexibility, more opportunities, namely for a two-story home. In terms of mitigating the design or the impact of the visibility to the greatest extent possible, I think we started with the premise that after design study that our house was not going to be visible, and our mitigation efforts were to, as I mentioned, to push the house as close to the street as we could get it. Now, it is still a large house, I'm not denying that, but as I said, going two-story allowed us to have a more compact footprint, and in fact allowed us to push the house as far away from the brow of the building pad as possible, which did reduce the visibility quite materially. We did study the building located in different locations on the site within the buildable areas, and I can say that we, in an effort to mitigate the visibility issue, we did push the house as far back towards Foster Road as we really could, while still maintaining a fire truck turnaround.
Thank you, Mr. Sagai. I'm going to need to interrupt you as the chair, if that's my prerogative to do. Rather than this become a second rendition of what you spoke about before, because we've heard many of the things. My question specifically to you was regarding the second-story element on the west side. And the home right now, for me, that's the most visible. For me, that's the privacy concern. And the home right now, I believe, is within 10 or 15 feet of the absolute maximum allowed of square footage on the property. And so my question to you as the architect that was referred to by the attorney, okay, my question to you is, what would happen if the second-story element on the west side, not the whole second story, the second-story element on the west side were removed? Could that be relocated somewhere else, in your professional opinion, on the property, in the home?
Certainly. I mean, it certainly could. It's a large site. I mean, the building pad is an acre. We haven't used nearly, a percentage of that, but I will say that we studied the massing and the elevation of that house with and without that room that you are referring to. And it was our professional opinion, as well as that of our team, including Mr. Singh and his wife Sharon, that room added visual balance to the elevation. And as such, And given the fact that we were nowhere near the 25% threshold, we felt as if that was a room that we could incorporate into the design to provide that balance. Furthermore, we did attempt to pull that room away from Mr. Brady's property. It's not directly on the setback line. It's a considerable distance from,
Okay.
so
I'm hoping with
attempting to be
acre
respectful.
lots that privacy is not really an issue. You should be able to find a place somewhere on the property so the privacy is not really an issue. But thank you for your response. I was specifically interested in the impact of the second floor on the west end, and I understand your reasons for putting it where you did. Thank you.
I would like to add that Mr. Singh has indicated that he is more than willing to consider additional landscape screening on site to mitigate the visibility of that room from the valley floor.
Thank you very much. Council, any other questions of the appellant? No. Okay, we will close that portion now, and we will turn to council discussion. Let's have disclosures first, Vice Mayor McNutt.
Thank you. I do want to acknowledge that I met with the applicant, I visited the site, I visited the official viewing platforms and the additional viewing platforms.
Yes, to reiterate, I did visit with the applicant once. I visited the site a couple of times, did all of the view platform visits, the formal and the informal platforms, more than once actually, and was able to appreciate the architecture of the property that's under development right now.
As I noted, I spoke with Mr. Singh, and I've also looked at the viewing platforms, formal and informal, on Los Gatos Boulevard several times.
Mr. Rice.
Visited with Mr. Singh and Mr. Choki. Close enough. Kyoki, sorry. Visited the site twice and observed it from all the various formal and informal viewing platforms.
Thank you. I, too, visited the site twice, met with the appellants, and read the 50-some pages, as has all the council members, but not the last 13 that we got in the last hour. So there's all our disclosures. Now let's talk about this. Council, who wants to open this up?
You want me to start?
Councilmember Spector.
I have a question of staff, and I don't know which one it is, so I will just make it generic staff. As I read the Exhibit 1 to the applicant's binder, and they have the portion of the hillside standards called constraints analysis and site selection, I read that a site is visible if it's capable of being seen if trees are removed, if it's capable of being seen if trees are pruned, if it's capable of being seen if trees are impacted by construction. That, to me, on its face, is talking about trees on the subject site, not a neighboring site. And it seems that it might be consistent with the staff report, page 4. So I'm looking at, the question I have is whether or not screening that comes from a neighboring site is screening that would allow a 2-story home. I'm reading that answer as no, but I certainly would like staff input.
Who's going to speak? Mr. Larson?
Sure. The guidelines in this particular area do not specify on-property versus off-property vegetation. Staff's interpretation, as I reviewed this case, given letters that had been submitted to the town, and I reviewed staff's performance on it, it appears that staff's practice has been to discount vegetation, be it on-site or off-site, for the 25% standard. And staff was doing nothing different than applying that past practice on this case. It is clearly within the council's policy discretion to decide differently, and that would inform future staff application of this policy.
And I understand what Mr. Larson said, and I appreciate that because I did not know what staff practice was, but it sort of went around the question I had. Maybe
Mr. Korb?
Just to augment the point and also address what occurred, very quickly, what occurred at the Planning Commission. I looked at the rules, and reached the conclusion, it was an interpretation, essentially that the applicant has been arguing and that his attorney has repeated today. But the staff interpretation and the applicant interpretation and what was my interpretation are just those. They're just interpretations. You are ultimately empowered to decide what the appropriate interpretation of these rules are, and so long as your interpretation is reasonable, it will be upheld. Mr. Williams, on behalf of the applicant, has argued that the interpretation that was relied upon by the Planning Commission was faulty, but that was based on his interpretation of the rules, and that is inconsistent with, as staff has said, the manner in which they have interpreted the rules in practice. Now council has an opportunity to weigh in. I think that's the bottom line.
Do you have a question? Council? Okay, Councilman Spector, were you done at this moment? At this moment, she's resting. Councilman Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think, let's follow on from this point. I think the significant thing we need to do first is determine whether or not the Planning Commission was appropriate in its decision or in error or dealt with issues that were beyond the scope relative to policy. And when I went to the Planning Commission minutes wherein this was on the April 22nd meeting, where the motion was made. The motion was made by Commissioner Jensen, and it related to the only issue that seems to be extant right now, and that is that there's the visibility of the house. It was acknowledged in staff report that all of their issues are resolved satisfactorily except the question of visibility. And if you read the staff report, you notice that's clearly stated when the summation is given. But in terms of the notice regarding the motion, this was on page 21 and 22 of the Planning Commission minutes of April 22nd. After the motion was made, and this was to deny on the basis that the house was visible, Mr. Korb responded to a question regarding tree screening. I believe it was Mr. Erickson who raised the question. And I don't want to quote this out of turn, but let me make sure that I've got this correct. No, it was still in relationship to Commissioner Jensen's issue. He stated, I mean, there are many trees located in the hillsides that do screen properties are considered relevant for screening purposes and for the visibility determination. The hillside guidelines only talk about not considering trees will be affected by construction. Okay, there is no evidence that trees in question should be affected by any construction. The maker of the motion, Commissioner Jensen, then said appreciated the information, but noted, I don't think it's appropriate to rely on necessarily trees that you are not going to be responsible for maintaining and that you can't necessarily affect. Okay, and so the motion carried 6-0 with the chair recused because he had legal dealings with the applicant or with the property owner. I think the issue for us is policy. That's really what we're talking about here. It all comes down to how are we as a council going to interpret the policies as stated in our own documentation. For me, having been the mayor in 2001 when we approved the application for the McCarthy subdivision, I discovered that having read the language of the 2001 document about conditions of approval and noticed my name was signed at the end, so that's when I discovered that I was the one doing that. And there in no way does it determine or indicate that a two-story structure is not permissible in the subdivision, nor does it mention an 18-foot height. It mentions an awful lot of other things, but it does not mention either of those two issues. That brings us then to 2004 and the approval of the hillside design standards and guidelines. I believe there were only 3 of us on dais who were present for that approval. Councilwoman Spector and Councilman Rice were not present at that time, so only 3 of us can take responsibility for what happened then. But it was, I think, a significant a landmark decision for this community, and it has been our direction of travel and the rule within which we operate since that time. My interpretation of the rule is is based on both the language and the practicality of the question of how residences, structures on the hillside are viewed. And it goes to the point of our identifying 4 different view sites. And those view sites are very specific. Even if you look at the guidelines, it's even specific to the corner of the particular intersection that is being used for viewing. And in that document, it indicates that we do not want to see more than 25% of the structure. Now, to me, the logic says, if indeed you're using tangible objective view sites, very specific in dimension and location, and then exclude the issue of a treescape that is already in place, then it really doesn't make any logical sense to use a site to view. Because if you were, then in effect, you're standing there looking at a hillside, trying to see if there is some actual visibility of the story poles and the netting, and yet trying to also assume that there's no trees in front of it. And I think that's a good indication that the intent of the language was to include those trees that are in the view shed itself, in the treescape, that they cannot be excluded. It's irrational to exclude them. Now, I go back to Attorney Korb's interpretation. I think he's accurate. I think the interpretation that when the language talks about construction and the impacts on the vegetation, the trees, the tree protections under construction, that's specifically what it asks us to evaluate. Now, we also have an arborist report in this last series. They indicated there were 6 trees, I believe, only one of which was in an unhealthy state, 5 of which were either very good or good and would sustain without any serious issues to provide a view shed for masking this house. So I'm going to go to my interpretation of the policy, and that is it must include the treescape as present of that part of our urban forest that is healthy while we are making the evaluation for this particular decision.
Okay. Mr. Rice.
Seeing everybody jumping up to speak, I guess I'll go ahead. I too was looking at Mr. Korb's interpretation and came to find that was logical as well. And I'm not sure where the Planning Commission erred, because they didn't have guidance from council. So I'm not sure I'm going to make anybody real happy with this, but I don't believe necessarily that the 25 or that the 18-foot limit would apply on this site. I am more swayed by concerns about what we'll call neighborhood compatibility and how this house may or may not fit with its neighbor that's already there and the neighbors to come. Not saying that a 2-story house wouldn't work there, but I too, Mr. Mayor, am troubled by the second story on the west end and how that affects the neighbors. And in the absence of a landscape plan that did not come with this package, there's no way I'm going to overturn the Planning Commission this evening and approve this project as it stands. But I want to make it clear that I believe that the screening that is off-site, from my perspective, does matter. I don't believe, given the evidence that's before us this evening, I don't believe that this project is necessarily visible. Doesn't mean that if it gets redesigned that it won't be. But my inclination is going to be to send this back.
Thank you. Now the Honorable McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. we've had 2 or 3 or 4 years, I lose track of time here, of working with the Hillside guidelines, but it's still a new document, and we are still fine-tuning and still discovering areas, as you've already heard this evening, where there is confusion or disagreement about what it says. This is the first time that council has had an application that's come before us that's talked about visibility, that was talked about viewing platforms, where we've had to look at and evaluate the calculation of what percentage is visible. So, we're always discovering something new, and I do think that it has uncovered some areas, some policy questions that need to be clarified. Starting with the height, the hillside guidelines do not say that all homes in the hillsides have to be 18 feet or lower. It says if you are on a significant ridge line, and it defines that, then that applies. And we had a project through here a few weeks ago where that was a consideration. If it's going to be more than 25% visible, then that applies. But otherwise, you are free to explore the possibility of a 2-story home. There is not an absolute limit. In terms of this visibility, we have the whole area of landscaping, and my day job is as a writer, and so it's always interesting to me how you can take a sentence and use parentheses and commas and interpret it a couple of different ways, as you've already heard here tonight. But it does not make sense to me, from a common sense point of view, to think that let's presume that all the trees tumble off the hillside and then what would be visible, because that's not going to happen. We're wanting to work and take advantage of the lavish Mother Nature that Mr. Davis likes to talk about. It's there, and we don't want to even begin to imagine what it would be like without that. On page 13 of the guidelines, the sentence that we're talking about it's in parentheses, which is always an interesting way of writing, and then it starts with potential, which is in quotes, which is, adds it some more. Potential is defined as capable of being seen from a viewing platform if trees or large shrubs are removed, significantly pruned, or impacted by construction. My interpretation, as Mr. Corb's, is that by construction relates to all 3 of those previous words, and that those are not separate and unique applications. In a couple of pages later, we even talk about encouraging people to add landscaping on page 15, add landscaping in order to block visibility even more. The other point I want to bring up that, again, is something new that we need to clarify is this idea of viewing platforms. So we have specific locations of viewing platforms, but what is a view? Now, I went to these viewing platforms multiple times with my eyes, and I could not see the orange netting. I got really frustrated. If you use a camera with a zoom lens or a telephoto lens, you can see it. I finally took my binoculars and I went, and with binoculars, then I could see it, and then I could kind of evaluate and think, oh, okay, this is what I'm seeing in the photo. But then I'm saying to myself, well, if I'm standing on the street and I can't see it with my naked eye, isn't that the point? So I think that is something that we, again, need to clarify as we go forward. Are we talking about what you can see as you stand there just with yourself, or with a camera, or with binoculars, and then start doing the calculations? I'm not sure. We have an incomplete application, so I was going to ask anyway whether we could even do this tonight. So, Mayor, I'm going to ask whether or not we need to finish up our discussion of our concerns, council's concerns or feelings about the policy issues, and then if we're going to need to continue it, in any case, either coming back to us or back to Planning Commission because the application is incomplete, and in either one of those possibilities, then the applicant could accommodate your concerns or not in terms of the second floor.
Thank you, Mr. Korb.
I wasn't raising my hand.
I'm volunteering.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just simply point out the fact that the staff has pointed out that the application is incomplete, was carried forward because of the dispute concerning the height issue. The Planning Commission made a decision based solely on the height issue. One of council's options, if council disagrees with the policy call made by the Planning Commission regarding the height issue, would be to reverse that decision based on the policy interpretation, which ultimately, as I said previously, rests with council, and then remand the application back to the Planning Commission, because one thing your record doesn't contain is any discussion regarding view impacts, privacy impacts, neighborhood impacts on these adjoining properties. You've heard some testimony about those tonight. You've had some evidence regarding the exterior architecture, but the Planning Commission certainly didn't have an opportunity to get into those other issues because of the fact that the application wasn't complete.
Does that do it for you, Ms. McNutt, or do you need further clarification? Should I volunteer somebody else?
I'm going to think about my options here.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Brzezinski, you had...
If it's okay with you, Mr. Mayor.
Sure. It's my role.
I think that one of our roles tonight is to clarify for the Planning Commission what the parameters are within which they need to operate. Because as I read the transcripts of both meetings and the staff report, I think that there were some issues that were made by assumption or interpretation that require the policymakers, that would be us, to help the Planning Commission understand the next round. And I think one of those issues is related to the 18-foot limit that apparently was specified at the very beginning in the discussions by staff. I think the other issue is our two-story homes applicable to this particular subdivision or site. And then the third question is the issue of screening. And how is the screening and the determination of visibility to be determined? And I'm going to, if you wouldn't mind, I'd like to start kind of in reverse and go through the issue of, first of all, what's the instruction to the Planning Commission, my opinion, regarding screening, that it's very specific. The purpose of our looking at the view points, the view sites on the valley floor, and the four designated, and the fifth, any other to be determined by the deciding body. I think that's a very specific and significant point that needs to be made, and I would like to see if this deciding body wants to make a recommendation regarding any of the view site besides the four that are indicated in our document. My sense is that, and I agree with Councilwoman McNutt, as I looked at this at the sites, at the only site that was applicable, I assume Highway 9 and 17 was applicable, but I couldn't see anything from there. But the site on the boulevard of Blossom Hill, and then, kind of moving up and down from that site, there was some visibility. It was a very difficult visibility to ascertain. By the time you really kind of moved from, let's say, the old Ford property, the old Swanson Ford property, to the Acura property. So we're dealing with auto dealers here, or former auto dealer and current auto dealer. It was visible. By the time you got to Robertson Boulevard, it was invisible. So you're talking about a distance of probably 3/4 of a block or so where there is some visibility. I would not have said that visibility could have easily been determined to be 25%. It was difficult to view, and it disappeared as soon as you hit Robertson Boulevard. Now, it disappeared because there's a lot of tree screen as you go down the boulevard at that point. I was surprised by the sighting on Glen Ridge, because it's not on the floor. It is a higher elevation, but in some ways, I noticed it was probably logical, because when I stood at the neighbor's property, Mr. Brady's property, and you looked west, it's highly visible. You can see Glen Ridge. You can see all the homes on Glen Ridge. But in the reverse view, as pointed out in the picture given us by the applicant, it still is difficult to view, although it's easy to identify the site because you can see Mr. Brady's property. And I think it's because there's no tree screen on the west side of the Brady property as you look into the valley towards the downtown. I'm not, at this point, as an individual on this council, interested in adding more view sites for this property. I think that we've satisfied that by looking at the sites that were available. So my recommendation to the Planning Commission and to the staff would be that we have sufficient sites already on books. But I would be open if there's a recommendation from another council member. I think I see my attorney is raising his hand here to make a comment.
Mr. Korb.
I was just going to point out that now there are two bases identified for reversing and remanding, if that were council's inclination. The first would be the policy question regarding visibility and whether that visibility determination can or should not include the existing trees. And the second one that has been identified as a potential basis is new information, because the Planning Commission's decision was ultimately based on the view of the house from other locations other than the specifically identified viewing platforms. Tonight, for the first time, evidence was presented, as pointed out by Mr. Williams, refuting the visibility of 25% or more of the structure, the proposed structure, from those other platforms. New information under council's rules that requires remanding the application back to the Planning Commission if that were the basis of a determination to reverse the Planning Commission's decision. Both can be cited, either one could be cited. It's up to council.
If I could continue.
Mr. Brzezinski.
And I will try to make the last parts brief. Two-story element versus one-story element. To me, we are a government of law, and that law is embedded in all of our documents and the ways those documents are interpreted. And I think the development standards and guidelines for the hillside are very clear. They indicate the various heights that are acceptable and appropriate. And in this particular case, I don't think there's an exclusion of a two-story element by any means. I think that if you start with the point of visibility, and you can clearly state that within our guidelines, this house is not 25% visible from any of the standard platforms, then the issue of 18%, or 18 feet rather, drops off the page, because that's the determiner for the 18-foot cutoff. This is obviously not a ridge line home. This is the home that's being situated in a cut that was the product of the demolition of a huge structure on the side of the hill, and the flat pad that was created, or pads were created by the property owner, Mr. McCarthy, in relationship to the demolition of that structure, meant that we actually did not change the contour of the land because the land was already graded. And if you stand on the property site and look to the south, and you look towards the ridge, you can see where that cut occurred decades ago when they first developed the Guadalupe College property. And that cut is, 30 feet up the hillside. So this is a different type of property. We applied in 2001, we applied the hillside guidelines and then confirmed them in 2004 for this property. But as far as what we've got on site, I do not think that either this is a ridgeline home or that it's a home that by definition is visible, which means that the 18-foot limit would not be applicable. Now, there are other limits, but that would not be applicable, and therefore the instruction to the Planning Commission that was the direction we should take is, I think, to be questioned. And so, again, as this council member, I would say that the instruction can be, you can go beyond 18 feet because of the visibility issue has been resolved, and you can build a second story, but that fits within the issue of architecture and site, and the question of whether it's compatible to the neighborhood, whether it's compatible with the neighbor's current home and the issue of privacy and the intrusion on his property. But those are all issues we would ordinarily deal with whenever we're looking at a one-story house versus a two-story house. Those would be my instructions to the Planning Commission to proceed to their own deliberations so that it's clear what they can and cannot decide at this point.
Okay, and with that, I'm going to toss in my own 2 cents, and perhaps we'll get a motion and we can move on. The way I look at this, the trees that are there are the trees that are there. Whether on Mr. Singh's property or the neighbors next door, they exist. The majority of them seem to be oaks, which are protected. If there's construction taking place, those trees will be protected. If somebody goes to cut down a tree, those trees will be protected. So whether they're on Mr. Singh's property or not on Mr. Singh's property doesn't really matter to me. When I look at standards and guidelines, each of those documents includes phrases that can be interpreted in numerous ways. There's comments such as, shouldn't be too massive. Okay, well, what's too massive to me may not be too massive to Mr. Przinsky. Should be compatible. What may be not compatible to me might be compatible for Mr. Rice. I don't know. Those are open to interpretation. I look at each application separately. As I look at this application, I look at page A0.1 in our staff report. It says the maximum square footage allowed of the home on this site is 6,400 square feet, and it says the drawings here are for 6,399.9 square feet. Okay, so they come in an inch or two under what's allowed. So when I look at that, and then I look at, in the binder, Mr. Singh, that you provided for us, I look at tab 9, page 6, Singh Residence View Study, story poles with houses and trees from the platform at Los Gatos Boulevard and Blossom Hill Road. And I think of Los Gatos Boulevard as our main arterial in town. And the intersection of Los Gatos Boulevard and Blossom Hill Road is certainly a legitimate place to view any property. And just because if you're over 25%, you're considered visible, and as the attorneys may or may not interpret, if you're under 25%, you may not be visible. Well, this is under 25%, and it's still visible. So I look at the term that says mitigated to the greatest extent possible, and I don't feel that's been done yet. I feel when you build a home at 6399.9 and you're allowed 6400, there's probably a little fudge room to either take a little off or move a little over. And when I look at this tab 9, page 6, and I see that second story on the west end that's visible, and I realize that the second story on the west end is also a privacy concern for Mr. Brady next door, and the second story on the west end is what's most visible from the most major intersection in town, it seems to me the right thing to do is to do something about that. So, I've heard what Mr. Przinsky said. I, too, don't think what we have before us tonight is ready for prime time, is ready to be approved. I think there's new information here that the Planning Commission didn't have. I think the issues that concern me, specifically the visibility, albeit under 25%, the visibility of the second floor of the west end is an issue that has not been mitigated to the greatest extent, is an issue that can be remedied. And I think the remedying of that will take care of what are, for me, the major concerns of this application. And I think, as it was Mr. Przinsky or Mr. Rice brought up earlier, the Planning Commission's biggest issue was visibility. And I think therein lies the problem, and I think it's a resolvable, solvable problem with, frankly, not much effort. So that's my 2 cents that I've got. I look at it very simply, and I look at each issue differently. And what happens to a neighbor next door, before or after, doesn't really apply. And I think we each interpret the guidelines and standards differently, and that's our prerogative to do. So with that, Council, I'll look for a motion, unless there's any further discussion on which direction this appeal should go. Seeing none, Vice Mayor McNutt?
Fine, I'll do it.
Okay.
To make the motion.
Nice.
So I will make a motion to grant the appeal on the basis of both a policy decision and discussion that council needed to have, and on the basis of new information that was presented to us, specifically the analysis of percentage of viewable space in the home. But because the application is incomplete and because we have concerns about compatibility with the next door neighbor, we will remand this back to the Planning Commission for further consideration and hopefully finalization.
Mr. Larson.
That work, Mr. Corp?
First, from a staff perspective, given the concern raised about the incomplete application, staff's interpretation of that is that it would not go back to Planning Commission until the application is complete, with both the grading and drainage plan as well as the landscaping plan for the parcel.
So that can be a condition of the motion.
That's how staff would interpret the motion, given the concern raised.
And
Staff also believes that's appropriate.
Let's ask the motion maker.
And I would agree, and in particular, the landscaping plan is going to be very important because I think that's going to be one of the solutions for the privacy issues and the remaining visibility issues that we have expressed.
I'll second.
We have a motion and we have a second. And just so I understand correctly, your motion, you said, was to grant the appeal and then sending it back.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Mr. Korb, you're shaking your head yes?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Any further discussion? Councilmember Spector.
I'm going to support the motion, sort of. I agree that the appeal should be granted. I agree that this should go back to the Planning Commission. I think that they should be looking at the issues of compatibility based on what the neighbors have stated here this evening. I also agree that it's obviously an incomplete application, but that's a secondary level of analysis. We definitely had new information which affected the Planning Commission's assessment of the percentage of visibility of the two-story structure. The portion with which I do not agree, but again, I still think it should go back to the Planning Commission, it's the policy. And it's sort of a chicken and the egg thing, and of course I think I'm right and everybody else is wrong. But I read the Roman numeral II constraints analysis and site selection, where it talks about whether or not trees can be a legitimate barrier to construction. And I am firmly convinced that based on the wording of this section, it talks about trees on your own property, because those are the trees that you have power to, where you have more power at least, to determine whether you're going to prune them, whether you're going to cut them down, or whether they're going to be impacted by construction. Now, I'm not, a total idiot. I don't think that means that you're never going to build a house on the hillsides if you're not going to consider other trees. Of course you're going to consider trees. Where the tilt factor comes in is that if you have a piece of property, you can build a house. The issue in the hillsides is visibility. And so if you want a house that's going to be 2 stories, then at that point you can't use your neighbor's trees to say, I can have 2 stories in order, and I'm going to use my neighbor's trees in order to do that. That's what Roman numeral II subsection B does not allow. And I heard and read what Mr. Korb said at the Planning Commission meeting, and quite frankly, I'm not quite sure that he said the same thing this evening, but be that as it may, I can already count noses and see that this is going to go back to the Planning Commission.
Honorable Przinski.
Honorable Mr. Mayor, well, I think that we're going to have to agree to disagree with Councilwoman Spector in this regard. I am not confused about the language. I think it's very clear, and I think it's very logical. And having been one of the 3 on board who did make the approval, that was my understanding at the time. This was in 2004. In addition, I think that there's a good logic to it, and it was also already demonstrated accordingly. My concern is to give the Planning Commission good direction. And so we cannot give them confused direction. We cannot go back to them and say, maybe you will and maybe you won't. We need to have a clear direction from council. That means a majority position. So I'm going to support the motion, but I'm going to ask the maker of the motion if there could be amendments within that motion to accommodate the fact that the council will get a chance tonight to weigh in on the interpretation of the issue of the use of tree screens that exist currently on the site as so defined by the attorney and as I interpret within the language to buffer the visibility of the house, whether a second-story home is allowed on this property because of the fact that it is a property that could have 1 or 2-story homes. And I think there was some confusion with the Planning Commission at the time about whether a 2-story home was allowable. And then I think the third issue that needs to be addressed is the whole question of the 18-foot limit as proposed. Now, if those things are embedded already in the understanding of the motion, then there's no need to amend. But I don't want us to walk away tonight with the applicant, the neighbors, or the commission not understanding our interpretation of the guidelines and standards.
Vice Mayor McNutt, following on Mr. Brzezinski's comments, I feel what he said is somewhat in your motion already. If you don't feel that so, then I'd like you just to simplify your motion, and I think we take Mr. Brzezinski's issues that he just raised as separate issues, rather than incorporate them all if you're not comfortable with that. How do you feel with about what he said?
Well, I do agree that it's important to give the Planning Commission guidance on this so that we don't prolong this any longer than it needs to be, and also as additional applications come forward. I think it might be wise to have my motion either clarified or through amendments specify those points, which may lose me a vote, but be that as it may, I do think that's important. So I'm trying to think of whether how I want to clarify this. So I will try, and then if it's not clear, then we'll see if there's an amendment.
Okay.
So just to clarify, within my motion is an acknowledgement that this property does qualify for a home as currently presented, and it's designed for a home taller than 18 feet because it's not on a significant ridge line, and it is not more than 25% visible. And also, I will clarify that visibility, as written in the hillside guidelines, does take into account vegetation and trees that exist on both the subject property and surrounding properties, but does not include, as it states, vegetation or trees that would be harmed or eliminated by construction, and that the viewing platforms that are appropriate for analyzing visibility for this property are the 4 traditional viewing platforms, and I would be open to also considering Glen Ridge because of the unique location of this property, but that doesn't mean that that would be included in all further applications.
Seconder.
That works for me as well.
Okay. Council, discussion about the Mr. Cord first.
I just want to just get a piece of clarification. I believe that as the motion was originally stated, you also added that the Planning Commission consider the impacts of the proposed structure regarding neighborhood compatibility. Did that also include the issue of privacy as raised by the neighbor?
Yes, it did. I didn't reiterate that because I was only concerned with trying to clarify policy
Correct.
issues and not all of the pieces that they're going to have.
I understand you didn't use the term privacy the first time around when you made the
Okay.
motion, so I just
Okay,
wanted
thank
to
you.
understand
Yes.
that.
Mrs. Spector? No? Mr. Brzezinski?
Yes, and Mr. Mayor, I want to reiterate the request you made regarding the potential not only to landscape the portion of the property that would have the most impact on our neighbor, but also the question of a possible redesign of that second-story element to accommodate some of the issues that were raised here at the dais regarding both the architectural compatibility and the issue of privacy and respect for the neighbor. And that, to me, is what we would expect to happen at the Planning Commission as they take a look at your design and to accommodate the negotiation between yourself and the neighbor so that we have a mutually agreeable outcome. Is that satisfactory, Mr. Mayor, for your request?
Yes. Thank you. And we have one more issue for the seconder, just to make sure that you second the privacy issues that Vice Mayor McNutt.
Since I was the one who first brought it up in discussion, yes, I'm okay with that.
That would be a yes. We're just doing this the right way. No? Any further discussion on this motion?
I'll call the question.
Seeing none, I will call for the question. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
No?
Motion passes 4-1.
And Mr. Mayor and council members of the public, council's decision tonight is a tentative one. I am directed to draft a resolution finalizing that decision and to bring that resolution back at the next council opportunity, which will be in August.
Thank you. And for clarification, because it was confusing to me at first, we approved the appeal and sent it back. Granted the appeal and sent it back. That might be a first for me. We've denied appeals and sent back. Okay. All right. All right. I'm still, okay. That's fine. Okay, that is done. We're now moving on to item number 24. Other business. This is review of and direction regarding the tree removal permit process and adoption of resolution approving the revised master tree list. And Mr. Todd Perso.
Sitting down, we do have a desk item that's been distributed to the council. I just wanted to highlight that to make sure you saw it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. And thank you, Greg, for calling up the desk item. Just for clarification, the desk item is a revised version of the master tree list, which was originally included in the packet for item 24. All the desk item does is replace Exhibit A in your packet with some additional clarification as to the purpose of the master tree list. So here we are. It's my pleasure to talk about the tree permit removal. Let me try that again. The tree removal permit process. And what prompted this discussion was primarily two issues. The first was to obtain clarification of the matter of the master tree list and its purpose, and to provide some additional clarification as to the definition of protected trees. Examining these two issues, it became clear that we needed to perform an entire review of the tree removal permit process as it applied to both town-owned and private trees. What am I pointing at? There we go. Trees can be beneficial to the community for many reasons. They can contribute to property values. They can influence the overall look and feel of the community or of a specific neighborhood. They can help create public gathering spaces. However, most of the benefits are environmental. They provide shading and cooling, which can result in reduced energy use, can provide ground stabilization, particularly in the hillside areas, and can have an impact on air quality as trees take in CO2 and give off oxygen. They also provide habitat for much of our local wildlife, and that's not to mention their impact on our surrounding view sheds, as you heard in the preceding item. From the town perspective, the town manages an inventory of over 20,000 trees in a variety of public areas. And given the fact of our most recent successful Arbor Day project, as the mayor is apt to point out, our inventory now exceeds 20,003 trees. The town has full responsibility in areas such as parks and median islands, but there is more of an informal shared care partnership in some park strip areas and the residential neighborhoods, especially with respect to the watering and the minor maintenance required to help establish trees, which essentially are taken care of by the private residences in those areas. Managing the town's inventory is a complex task involving assessing the trees, their condition, their corresponding maintenance needs, extending the tree life, keeping them healthy, maintaining their structure, and deploying resources in the most effective manner possible. All town-owned trees are protected under the town code regardless of size and their location. The trees are managed by the Forestry Services section of PPW using a combination of internal and contractual services. However, trees frequently do need to be removed for a variety of reasons. They can be removed for causing damage to public infrastructure, or they can be removed for posing risk to public safety. When tree removal is required, trees are posted with a public notice for removal for a period of 10 days, and those notices are appealable to the Parks Commission. For replacement plantings, or even new plantings for that matter, the master tree list provides the guidance for the selection of the new and replacement plantings. Also important to note, in having referenced some of these items on this slide, that having a tree care department, having a tree care ordinance, having a comprehensive community forestry program, and an observance of Arbor Day are the 4 criteria required to be named a Tree City USA, which the town recently received this honor for the 29th consecutive year. In many ways, trees on private property present an even greater challenge. These trees also provide all of the same community-wide benefits, such as aesthetics, tree canopy, as well as the environmental benefits depending on the location. However, unlike public trees, there are issues and responsibilities that reside solely with the property owner that may impact their development opportunities, as well as create safety and liability concerns for that owner. Town code provides the definition of protected trees on private property as well, and while all town-owned trees are protected, on private property there are several different distinct definitions. Perhaps the most simple definition of all is that all trees with a diameter of over 12 inches, regardless of species, are defined as being protected. This diameter drops to 8 inches for certain native species. However, the definition of protected trees drops to trees in diameter of 4 inches or greater for properties undergoing zoning, subdivision approval, as well as certain other properties which are zoned either commercial, industrial, or undeveloped. While the zoning and subdivision approvals typically move through our Department of Community Development and the Planning Commission, our process here on the public works side typically deals with trees greater than 12 inches and how they relate to applications for removal on private, typically residential property. The process involves an inspection and assessment by the town arborist, and if the permit is approved, on-site mitigation is requested using the town's tree canopy replacement formula, which is also attached to the council report. If the on-site mitigation is not feasible or acceptable to the property owner, payment of an offset fee into the town's forestry fund is required. The funds are then used by staff to replace trees elsewhere in town, typically on town property. Unlike the town-owned trees, any appeals regarding the applications for removal on private property are appealable to the Planning Commission. Returning to one of the primary reasons for bringing this issue forward to council is the potential to exempt certain trees or situations from protected status, or to remove them from the permit process entirely. One situation to consider is the 30-foot clearance zone for properties in the wildland-urban interface fire areas. While Santa Clara County Fire Department recommends the creation of a defensible space around homes and structures in these zones, there is no specific designation of any particular species that posing a higher fire danger than others. However, there are several other agencies within the state of California that do designate eucalyptus and pines and recommend their removal within these clearance zones. If an exemption were to be allowed for this purpose, the staff recommendation would be as follows. For eucalyptus and pine, to allow the removal with a no-fee permit and no mitigation required. For all other species, to allow the removal, citing the clearance zone as the primary reason, but leave all other aspects of the permit procedure in place, including the permit fee and the mitigation requirements. As for the recommendations before council, staff is requesting adoption of the master tree list as submitted in the desk item. This list has been revised and its purpose clarified and was recommended unanimously by the Parks Commission at their meeting of June 2nd. And we are also asking for council to provide input and direction to staff regarding potential amendments to the town code with respect to the definition of protected trees and the tree removal permit process. That concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Turn my microphone on. All right. Any questions of Mr. Purcell? Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. I'm not a big fan of eucalyptus trees, but I know there's a lot around. So I guess my question would be, what is the wildland urban interface fire area? Is that when we got our map, the part that was red?
That's exactly right. In fact, the earlier item that had a public hearing that lasted all of about 10 seconds on the hazardous vegetation, that specifically deals with properties in that zone around the town, and there are specific maps that identify those properties. They're typically hillside properties.
All right, and the reason I raise the issue because using my neighborhood as an example, there are a lot of eucalyptus trees. And as you pointed out earlier, trees provide shade. They can also be a barrier to noise. And so if people went and tore down all these trees, it would get rid of shade. It would have the noise from the freeway come up. So as I'm understanding you, that wouldn't be the case in a situation which is not in this wildland urban interface area, correct?
That is correct.
But if someone were to come to you from this area, and what balance, if any, would be between getting rid of a pine or a eucalyptus and the other benefits that a tree gives?
That's essentially the balancing act. In consulting with Santa Clara County Fire, they have very specific guidelines that recommend a clearance zone around all properties. That doesn't necessarily dictate the removal of all trees. It does require that they're trimmed up to a certain distance off of roof lines, and that the low-lying vegetation be cleared in an effort to keep the trees from igniting, so to speak. In areas where you've got dense tree population and the fire can jump from treetop to treetop to treetop, that's where, in the opinion of CAL FIRE, for example, that's where eucalyptus and pine pose a higher fire risk than other species, and it's for that reason that we would single those out in that situation only.
Seeing no other questions of staff, we'll turn to the public card. Citizen Ray. And just for the record, I have you going last on this item.
That's good. That's good.
Yes, indeed. Not a bad document, okay? And I'm speaking as a biologist by education. Not a bad document. But what was left out was the fact there's no emphasis on California natives on a tree list. I can't believe it. Okay? Drought, water, the future of California is in jeopardy because of these issues and the overpopulation, okay? So, to have a tree list of preferred species and not have any accent on native plants which are inherently drought resistant if they grow in California is absurd. Okay? And also, one that is missing from the preferred list is Fremontia. Fremontia is a native plant that was named after Fremont, who opened up the Northwest, okay? And I want to tell you, when it blooms in the spring, it is gorgeous. Yellow blooms, golden blooms, solid. And not to have that on a preferred tree list in Los Gatos is again absurd, okay? But then going to the good news. The recommendation against eucalyptus and pines is dead on. I happen to have a copy of a brochure put up by East Bay Mud relative to the Oakland fire, where 3,000 homes burned, 26 people died in their cars, and one of the principal problems was there were pines and eucalyptus everywhere, okay? And these are dubbed pyrophytes because they don't burn green, they explode green. And you need to understand, particularly Ms. Spector, you need to understand the danger of eucalyptus and pine trees in the side yards of urban homes. I've watched in Orinda when a fire from below a series of homes on a ridge burned up slope, okay? Kids. We lost 5 homes out of 15. And they were the 5 that had pines and eucalyptus all around them, and there was no preparation. You have to understand that eucalyptus is an urban desert as per the UC California.
Citizen Ray?
Okay.
Appreciate that. All right, that closes the public portion on number 24, and we now look to council discussion and a motion. You want to defer to the lady? Sure. Vice Mayor McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Brzezinski. I actually just had 2 questions of staff that occurred to me. Do we happen to have tonight a visual of the fire area that we could put up? Or can you?
I don't think we do. I'd have to get that back.
Because I'm trying to remember, and I should have asked for it ahead of time. I'm sorry, I didn't. I'm trying to think about how much of the town it covers.
It's very extensive.
And I'm also, based on the previous item, visualizing the hillside with all of eucalyptus and pines gone, and how many houses are going to be suddenly visible, and if we'll have to tear them down, I don't know, in order to meet all of our guidelines here. But I'm a little concerned. I hope you can find that, because I'm trying to figure out how much are we opening ourselves up to some problems if we were to lose all of these. So that was one question. And the second question is, on the master tree list, I know we have in these guidelines over here for the hillside some recommended trees. Do we have any either recommended or restricted master tree lists for other private development, or is that just open-ended?
At this time, no, we did not approach that. Our intent with the master tree list was to provide clarification that it's useless for town right-of-way, parks, and other public areas. Although I will point out that not only did we clarify the purpose and intent of the list, but in going through the list, we did take out several species which we found to be invasive and otherwise damaging to town infrastructure, most notably sidewalks. And we did add a variety of native species back onto the list, or not back on, but added them to the list. Species such as California Bay, California Buckeye, Valley Oaks, and so on. So we did try to increase the sensitivity to native landscaping. I think we have that map, so I'll hold off on answering the first part of your question. I hope I answered the second part, but we'll hold off on that.
Mayor, if I could just make a comment while they're getting that up there. I do appreciate having the subline here under master tree list clarifying that this is for town property. I think it would be helpful, again, based on our previous discussion of how easy it is to misinterpret things, to also add something that says does not apply to private property, just to clarify, because pieces of paper through the ages get tossed around, and want to make sure that nobody thinks it applies necessarily to them. Oh.
Here's Main Street turning into the boulevard. Here's Shannon and Blossom Hill. I have my glasses on. This is Ann Arbor to Short Road and Blossom Hill.
Mr. Corp, I'm presuming, since this has nothing to do with the financial value of our home, that we don't all have to recuse ourselves?
The tree item? No.
I'm just making sure, because
Yeah, no.
we're all in the fire zone.
Yes, but this is almost ubiquitous. It applies.
That's what I figured. I just wanted to get clarification.
And Mr. Mayor, just to
Mr.
clarify,
Larson.
large swath of the town, obviously, it's just for the trees in the 30-foot.
Within the home, 30 feet range. Thank you. Do you have a question? No? Mr. Rice? No?
I think
Mr.
Mr.
Brzezinski
was first.
Thank you, Mr. Rice. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to return to Councilman Inspector's comments. And I think that we have to be very careful of all or nothing thinking. You know, it's the same concept that says if someone could walk into a street at a crosswalk, they're going to be killed, and so we have to cut down a tree. I think that the issue really is what is our fire agency, that is Santa Clara County Fire, what are they determining as appropriate to fire safety in our community? They provide us the extended or enhanced fire zone, and I think it's obvious that there's a very significant part of our community that is within that fire zone, including this building right here, right now. And in preparation for tonight's meeting, I thought I'd do a kind of a drive-by to get a sense of pines and ukes out in our neighborhoods. And a couple things struck me. They are a very significant part of our urban forest, particularly aged ukes that are extremely tall and sometimes grow in groves and are a very, very important element to the aesthetics of our community. The same goes for pines, although I'm not a big fan of either tree. They're both the dirty tree, but they are trees that have grown up within our urban environment, and they do serve to enhance our treescape. And to say they all come out, and they come out on the basis of no permits and no need to replace, because it's within 30 feet of a home or a structure. The other structure could be what? A shed? So my concern is this, that we move quickly into a decision that's going to have major consequences for the tree mix that we have already within our environment, and currently within our language have opportunities to permit trees to be taken down that are unhealthy or that are going to impact residences. I think safety can be just as easily an issue. And I'll tell you right now, when you watch the Summit Fire last year, those were oaks that were going up. I mean, that was the prime tree of choice of that particular fire. If you were here during the Lexington fire, they were redwoods. If a major fire gets going, it all has to do with your ground cover, with the tree fuel ladder that exists, and with homes that are built into very, very isolated areas where the homeowners have not taken care of making their homes defensible, particularly with things like roof materials, siding, and so forth. I think that we would be probably ill-served if we were to take this on face, but certainly to continue to reinforce the fire protections that we are currently engaged in enhancing with our hillside neighbors, and do it on a case-by-case basis, the intent being that you can take, with proper care, you can take a eucalyptus or a pine and make it a fire-safe tree. And I think that should be the direction we take, rather than to do a wholesale removal of these trees without permits or without cost.
Thank you. Honorable Mrs. Spector.
Thank you. I'm certainly mindful of the balance between safety and aesthetics, and I'm certainly aware that as a council person, the tilt goes to safety. But what I did when I read this agenda item is I looked out the window of my home. Now, because my neighborhood is one of the first, if not the first, to have been built in Los Gatos, it's built along the creek. So what you have across the street from me are homes right along the creek, right behind them, between the creek and the home, are tons of huge eucalyptus. So I'm thinking, well, if I understand this correctly, I guess those eucalyptus could all be removed without permit and without cost. And I just wanted to raise the issue so that I could better understand it. I think as a practical matter, we might be bordering on the little yellow part right by the red, but that's really neither here nor there. I just wanted to understand better how this policy would apply in the real world.
Rice.
So as I read the item, we've actually got two issues before us. First is the master tree list, which I'm fine with. I like the work that's been done there, and when it comes time to deal with that, I'm in support of that. I'm going to disagree with Council Member Brzezinski from the perspective I'm not sure you can make a eucalyptus within 30 feet of a home safe. I hadn't really looked into pines, but eucalyptus are a fire hazard. They burn hotter than most. They are significant trouble for firefighters as well. I like the direction we're going, but I am also conscious of the concerns that I'm hearing, because I think they're legitimate concerns. I'm not averse to allowing eucalyptus and pines within 30 feet that are within their urban fire, however, if I'm saying it correctly. Interface area, thank you. Without fee, without permit, but I'm not sure I would go as far as to say they don't need to be replaced somewhere else on the property if possible. That might be a mitigating answer to that. I'm also looking to take it maybe a little further in that direction, and how do we apply this elsewhere in town? Because, as Councilmember Brzezinski pointed out correctly, we do have groves of eucalyptus, which I think we've seen a couple of items come through regarding specific eucalyptus trees that drop limbs on sidewalks near public facilities. And I've driven by that particular public facility in the last couple of years and seen rather large limbs laying on the ground. These are not safe trees. And how we deal with this, maybe we're not ready to adopt something tonight on this, but I'm pleased with the direction we're going, and as part of the impetus that got this whole conversation started, I want to come to something that we can agree with, that, as Council Member Spector said, puts safety first. But I don't want to look at the hillsides and all of a sudden see it completely denuded of pines and eucalyptus, because it's not practical either. So there's got to be a balance. We've got to figure out how to make this work, but we're on the right track.
Okay, I'll add in my 2 cents. I'm entirely fine with the revised master tree list. I think you did a fine job on that, and I think I'm hearing consensus here, and if we need to handle that with 2 motions, we will. The issue about the eucalyptus, I don't like eucalyptus either. Pine trees, they're messy, the dry needles, the fire, that all scares me. Then you bring up the comments about an oak tree fire, redwood tree fire. I think the importance, I think the fire department is the expert. And I think that clearance from the home is what's very important. And in following up with what Mr. Rice said, perhaps there's something, Mr. Capurso, towards a compromise that might have been rumbling around in your head. You know, I don't know, I'll just throw out, if you can cut a eucalyptus tree in half without any permit or mitigation, and you bring down the possibility of it, first of all, you reduce half the tree and falling over and those types of things. I don't know where to go. I don't care if we lose eucalyptus because of the fire hazard and because the branches breaking. I know when the winds come, the branches splinter off and break. I know very few lawns can live underneath eucalyptus because of the acid. I know pine needles not only are messy, but very readily combustible. And I think that's a fire hazard. We've been told this by the fire department. So I think something in some direction is appropriate to do. But I share Councilmember Spector's concern about if we just say ukes and pines, no fee, no mitigation, that all of a sudden we're seeing a lot more houses and infrastructure and such than what we want to do, because I'm sure there's a lot of both in our hillsides. So I would suggest, Council, I'll make the motion, I'll divide it in half. I'll make a motion to approve the master tree list. Second. Got a motion made and second. Any further discussion regarding that motion? Seeing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Okay, that one's knocked off. I'm looking now for a motion or suggestions or further discussion on eucalyptus and pine trees. I feel a consensus that no one here is really in love with either species, but I don't see consensus on how to remedy the situation and the concern for fire. Was it Mr. Larson or Mr. Capurso? Mr. Brzezinski. All right.
I think we should ask staff to go back and take another look at this.
Okay.
I'm not ready. I would not approve the application or the application of these recommendations. I think it's, you know, although we may see some issues that are of value to us in relationship to fire safety, I think we need to have a much clearer understanding of that, and perhaps more consult with the Santa Clara County Fire Department to ask for their advisement here. I think it would be arboreal disaster if those were all to come out at this point in time, and it would be too easy to do, and there are an awful lot of people who I don't know, hate may be too strong a word, but dislike strongly the ukes that are in their backyard, and I think that the question of fire safety would probably extend throughout the community, not only to Councilwoman Spector's neighborhood, but right up into the Almond Grove and into the Glenridge area, and technically speaking, a major conflagration could easily move way beyond that fire zone, and so the issues are, how do we prevent that from happening, and how do we prevent the potential destruction that could occur by reinforcing fire safety and fire science within our community.
Ms. Brzezinski, I'm going to join your effort, your comments and suggestions to staff, and then I'll look to the rest of council either for a motion or consensus on that. It may be something as simple, Mr. Capurso, instead of a 30-foot radius. I mean, this room I think is 50 feet. Okay, so it maybe is something if the fire department's recommending 30 and we say up to 20. Okay, it may be something like that, which obviously would limit the amount of trees, because anything beyond 20 could not be removed without a fee, pre-approval, inspection, and mitigation. So something like that. So his idea of going back to you and you coming back to us in August, September, with some sort of compromise, I think makes sense. Mr. Brzezinski, I see you have another comment.
Yeah, the comment is the 30-foot is the fire expectation of defensible space. That's where that comes from. So it is it's built into the language of their protective ordinances and expectations. But I agree that to move forward, we should ask for more study.
Ms. Spector.
And what would be helpful to me, and I don't know if it's at all possible, but to get some type of sense of what is the magnitude of trees in numbers of this kind. I mean, are we going to have one half of Los Gatos denuded, and or are we talking about just a few blocks in Almond Grove? I don't know. It just seems like it could be a lot and it could be easy. So we just need more process and more information.
Thank you. The Honorable Mr. Rice.
In the interest of moving this along, I'll move to continue this item to a point in the future where Mr. Capurso can come back with a little bit more information as he's heard from this council.
That's your motion? Second. Motion made and second. Further discussion? Vice Mayor McNutt.
Just that my concern would be the lack of a permit is a little bit too open-ended for me, and also not requiring a replacement tree is a little bothersome to me, so those would be factors that I would recommend looking at.
Back to square one. Mr. Capurso.
I should point out, at least if I wrote this the way I was thinking at the time, that I was not recommending that the removal of these trees would be done without a permit. It would be a no-fee permit. We didn't want to place an undue burden on people that were trying to comply with fire safety. So the recommendation was to still retain them in the permit process, but to waive the fee. That will obviously be one of the things that we revisit. We could easily accommodate the mitigation requirement, because actually right now the mitigation requirement is fairly ambiguous. Those that want to mitigate on site will do so, and those that don't will pay into the town's reforestry fund. So that option could remain. I think it is important that we get some additional clarification from the local fire agencies on how they view trees and their removal within that 30-foot defensible space. Are they really behind the wholesale removal of certain species in that area, or is there a type of trimming that we can then recommend? Also worth pointing out that trees can be trimmed up to 33% of their foliage without a permit, and anything beyond that is considered a severe pruning and falls under the definition of a tree removal for the purposes of the permit process. But those are things that we will clarify over the next couple months.
Sure. I forgot about the 33% built in already. Okay, we have a motion made and seconded. We're there? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. That ends 24. Thank you, Mr. Capurso. Now, number 25, staff report by Mr. Larson regarding the proposed ballot measures.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, we've had public comment at council meetings to staff and council members, as well as in the media, regarding concerns about facts and information about the two ballot measures that are currently in circulation. We have a fairly simple staff report that we've provided to you. The actions available to the council are to provide any direction to the staff you wish on the fact sheet, to direct staff to conduct research necessary to provide additional public information on the impacts of one or both measures if they do collect enough signatures to go on the ballot. And then regarding the draft resolution, the council actually has three options. One is to adopt it covering both measures. One is to adopt it covering only one of the proposed ballot measures. Third would be to continue the resolution until after staff returns with the additional research and information if the measures make it to the ballot. Or a fourth option, of course, would just be to not move on the resolution at this time. And I'll answer questions if the council has it.
Thank you, Mr. Larson. Any questions of council? Any questions from council of staff? Seeing none. Any questions from the public? Well, we have one, Mr. Rice.
Just a quick question. The fact sheet, is that a draft of what you would produce? Or is it just representative at the
This is, it's kind of like the list of donation opportunities the council approved in the budget. It is the listing of the facts. It is not a public communication vehicle. So if we were directed by council to disseminate this, it might be done through newspaper ads, email, the town's website. It probably wouldn't appear in this format.
Okay, thank you.
Vice Mayor McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. How do the questions listed here related to the library project differ or replicate what's already contained in the FAQ that's posted on the town website?
I'll ask Assistant Town Manager Pamela Jacobs to join me. Some of this regarding the library is new or being developed information, but it can certainly all be included in the FAQ.
Yes, fact number 1 and number 2 are not included in the FAQ. The other two, oh, and fact number 3 isn't either.
Thank you. Any other questions of staff? Councilmember Spector? Nope. No more questions of staff. Now go to the public. Having no cards for the public. Well, it's making its way to you. Okay. Citizen Ray, you're up.
How do you like that? Didn't work, did it? You know, Mr. Mayor, I just get better and better as it gets later, okay? Please don't try and cut me out. I can't believe any American in their right mind would take a stand against a vote on a given issue. And that's exactly what this staff report does, okay? I thought voting was the American way, not in Los Gatos, evidently, at least from a staff point of view. Unbelievable. What an insult to the red, white, and blue that I served. What an insult. And I want to tell you, term limits is a yes by any thinking Los Gatos. I've been doing what I do for over 40 years, and I can tell you without any reservation whatsoever that typically when a politician is elected for 6 months, they represent the people. But after about 6 months, that disappears, and it becomes a private club, okay? A group of 5, if you will, okay? That become inclusive. They don't go out to anybody but themselves. Power becomes the ultimate gain of these individuals as they go from term to term. As incumbents, they get reelected. Power, they love it. So I have always been 100% for term limits. It's the American way. And let's have a vote on it, okay? The same for capital expenditures. You know my position on that. The RDA program, the law, prohibits new construction of a library. And you don't want to realize that. You take the language in there that says land use for a library is okay. I agree with that. Land use, if you want to furnish a library, it is appropriate for the RDA area, okay? But that's not what you're doing. You are robbing Peter to pay Paul. You are taking the money from the Almond Grove, the downtown commercial area, and you are spending it in a prohibitive fashion. And we will find
no, don't go any further, because you've said enough tonight, and you've got 1, 2, 3, 4 more issues you want to speak on. So I'll give you one warning right there, because you had an explanation when you were seated down, and you've twice exceeded your time. So don't push me a second further. Thank you.
I'll be back, okay?
That ends that. Closing the public portion, I now look to council for comments. Okay, I'll make a couple of comments. Role that the town has, and it's been researched by our attorney, is the town has the right to produce facts. They have an FAQ sheet page on the town website, and they've got a fact sheet here. And what's before us tonight, council, as the town manager said, is 4 choices. We can adopt both. We can adopt one. We can continue the resolution and wait until see what votes come in by the end of the month, April 30th, and go from there. Personally, I think the more information that is put out to the public, the better served the public is. I think it's an informed voter that is most important. I happen to disagree with what Mr. Davis said. As far as the voting, I believe there's already been 10 public meetings which the public has voted on, and I certainly don't see a need for more of that, but this is America, and it all depends if people sign that ballot initiative to go on to the petition to go on to the ballot. What's before us tonight, Council, is do we want to put this fact sheet out in the form of a resolution, or actually just put the resolution out? Put the resolution out to contain information about the capital financing measure as well as the term limit measure and then the election costs. I have to tell you, the only place that I'm torn is whether or not we as a council should put out information on the term limits, because that theoretically applies to us, even though it doesn't apply to seated council members. It doesn't really apply to us, it applies to our successors. But that's what I'm looking for discussion for from council. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. I have no conclusion, I just have thoughts. On the fact sheet, the part about the capital financing, 3 and 4 I don't think are clear. If this is supposed to be a fact sheet, I don't think 3 and 4 are clear for the public, for residents. So one thing. Secondly, I have no problem with fact sheets, with giving facts out. I am concerned about facts on the term limits because I think that looks self-serving. Election cost facts are okay, and I would not be comfortable with the resolution that is attachment 2.
And the resolution pertaining to term limits, the second paragraph or the entire resolution? Just for clarification of what you said.
Well, that's because I guess I don't have a clarified brain on it, but at this juncture, I'm not comfortable on the resolution.
Okay. Vice Mayor McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I will divide these into 2 parts. The first is the proposed initiative regarding term limits. I also think it is inappropriate for us as a council or us as a town to be taking a position on that. I don't think it's an issue that really requires a fact sheet. I think it's self-evident. They'll get the signatures or they won't. It'll be on the ballot or it won't. It'll pass or it won't, and we'll do what we do. So I think we should just leave that one alone. Regarding the library, we do have already established an FAQ, as I mentioned earlier, that's on the town website, and I believe it's also included on the Friends of the Los Gatos Library website, which is being referenced in campaign material that they're putting out regarding the initiative. I do think it would be helpful perhaps to add 2 or 3 additional questions to that FAQ that reference the possibility of an initiative and explains how that works and what the impact could be potentially on the library. I do want to mention that there are several cities locally that have built lovely libraries recently using redevelopment funds and only redevelopment funds. So a trip to Morgan Hill or Milpitas would be nice for people who want to see what a redevelopment funded library looks like, for example. In terms of doing a resolution on the library, I also am very uncomfortable with that. I totally support the library project. I think we've had a very inclusive process. I think it's unfortunate the reports that we're getting about the misinformation that is being distributed, but there's a process for the community to register complaints with the police department and have those investigated. So I'm not comfortable with the resolution on either one of these items, but I would agree that 2 or 3 additional questions be added to the existing FAQ on the library project.
Thank you. Mr. Rice.
I think the more information that's out there, the better, and given the anecdotal evidence that we've heard over the last few meetings of bad information getting out there. I think any definitive information that we can get out, factual information that we can get out, is to the public's benefit, and I think that's part of our role here. I would weigh in that I agree that the putting out language or facts about term limits is probably not our role. I think it would appear self-serving. I think, Mr. Mayor, you spoke that it doesn't apply to the sitting council.
Correct.
But I believe it probably would apply to your, am I not?
No, we'll get clarification from Mr. Corbin in just a minute.
Okay.
But please complete your thought.
All right. And I'm not sure a resolution is necessary. So when I look at the recommendations, number one, review the attached fact sheet. We've been talking about that. Two, direct staff to conduct research necessary to provide additional public information on the impacts of one or both potential measures. I'm comfortable with that. I would like to direct staff to conduct additional research and make sure that we get as much factual information out as we can, either through our website or through additional opportunities to disseminate information.
Thank you. Mr. Brzezinski.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I fully agree with all of the comments made by my council member peers to this point. I would not be supporting a resolution. I think the council's position regarding the library approval is very clear, and that is the position that the community has heard and can evaluate if it's doing its own research regarding the petition that's currently in the works. As far as the term limits, I think perhaps it's possible to do this legally, but I think it's inappropriate to make this kind of a resolution for our public. It does seem self-serving, and in any case, it seems somewhat unethical for us to interfere with the electoral process. I would hope that the community is of such mind that they do a thorough evaluation of the initiatives that are at work and sign accordingly. As far as the fact sheet goes, I don't think it's a very strong sheet. I looked at the document and really kind of walked away thinking, this really doesn't tell me much. There's some things, for example, number 7 says in 2002, you're talking 7-year-old reference point, and some of the other statistics, they're statistics without real direction. So I think the idea of directing staff to conduct research for additional information, the focus being clear fact dissemination, is appropriate. It's certainly within our realm of possibility, but for the adoption of a draft resolution or to publish this fact sheet, neither of those would be acceptable to me.
Thank you. And hearing my fellow council members' comments, I'll make a motion that we approve recommendation 1 and 2.
In the interpretation staff would take of recommendation 1 would be to drop the language regarding the term limits, given consensus of council, to review the language and strengthen the language, and most likely include the relevant financing ballot measure items in the library FAQ.
Thank you. And what I looked at in number 1, 2 is the second half of the sentence that said, and provide direction regarding the dissemination of this information. So it hasn't yet been decided how that information will be pushed out. In what I heard with Vice Mayor McNutt speaking first when she asked the question of Ms. Jacobs was what information here is not on our FAQs, and it seemed like 1, 2, and 3 were not. And so I take recommendation number 1 as simply updating our current FAQs that are available via the Friends of the Library and the town website. And I don't see us proposing anything else more at this time as far as a mailer, as far as anything else going out. Vice Mayor McNutt.
Thank you, Mayor. I'm not clear on what you mean by number 2. So is anything regarding the term limits off the table to start with?
Yes, I think there's, in my opinion, there's consensus that we don't wish to put out information that affects us directly. So anything about term limits is not included.
Okay. So given that, what additional research do we want staff to conduct related to the initiative on the library?
Are you referring to number 2?
Yeah, I thought that was what your motion was, number 2.
Number 2, and I should have got rid of where it says impacts of one or both. I don't mean both, staff. I just mean one. Thank you for that clarification, Vice Mayor McNutt. I just mean the capital improvement, capital financing ballot measure. And what I want is, for instance, there's 2 or 3 new bullets they put on here that's not currently on our FAQs. So I think our FAQ sheet should be updated. And then as new information becomes available to us, I think that information should be put out on our FAQ through the town website. For instance, new information when June 30th comes and goes. Okay, something after June 30th, they're either going to have enough votes to go onto the ballot or not. That will then change when a new election date is or not. So as new information becomes available, I just want us to put that the facts, as Mr. Rice said. I just want to get the facts out there. Mr. Larson.
Yes, following on the mayor's comments, what other jurisdictions have done in documentation provided by the town attorney's office is the council directs staff to prepare information such as this once a ballot measure has been submitted, and then that information is provided back to council and a decision is made at that time should the council wish to take further action in support or opposition to the measure or dissemination of that information. What I suspect will happen over the next 3 months that will provide new opportunities for staff to report back to you is the possible submission of petitions, and when those petitions are submitted is a variable, as well as how many signatures are submitted is a variable that will determine which election cycle we're on, what the cost to the town will be of that election, how that might impact the library project that the council's previously approved in the CIP. And so I think we will have new information available to report back to you if and when petitions are actually submitted on one or both measures.
Okay, so I'll, if I may, revise my own motion there just for clarification purposes. And number 2 would then read, direct staff to conduct the research necessary to provide additional public information on the impact of the capital financing measure should it appear on a future ballot before the registered voters of Los Gatos. No second. Okay, it dies for lack of a second. We'll look for another motion from council. Yes? No?
No.
Okay. Okay, council, what I think we ought to do is we have a responsibility to provide facts to the public. I think the public looks to us, the Friends of the Library look to us, the media, everyone. And I think what our role is not to be an advocate, but, and I'm talking about the town, not being an advocate, but to be a resource. And towards that end, I think as we receive new information, we have an obligation, I see hands going up now, we have an obligation to disseminate that information to the public. Mr. Brzezinski.
Mr. Mayor, my own feeling is that the staff has and will continue to provide information as it becomes evident. I don't see really a purpose in our moving to direct them to do anything differently than we've done so far. I don't think that the fact sheet as such really provides more significant information on the issue of the capital project. And perhaps the lack of a second would state what my feeling is that I think we need to go no further with this particular action at this time.
Just continue what we've been doing. Okay. Mr. Rice.
I think that's well stated by Councilmember Brzezinski. I'm not sure that there's, unless we're prepared to pass the resolution, I'm not sure there's really any action warranted here, but I am curious because you alluded to something that Mr. Korb was going to reference, and I'm curious what that was before we get off this item.
Go back on term limits?
Well, if that's what it was.
That's what I was referring to. Mr. Korb, if you could just give clarification as far as the proposed ballot initiative and its applicability to seating council members.
Okay. I have not been directed to do a complete analysis of the measures that are currently proposed and being circulated. I will tell you that the language of the term limits measure as currently drafted, as being circulated, does not say anything specific with regard to retroactivity, meaning that it's not clear in the language of that measure that it is intended to apply to terms already served. And that's a question. Is it prospective or is it retrospective in effect? It does contain a rather odd statement that to the, and I may be misquoting it, but it's effectively to the extent that this measure is considered prospective in effect, then anybody who runs for a third term after this measure is adopted is acting against the will of the people. Now, I cannot say that that means that it's supposed to be retroactive. I don't think it's very clear, but that's the language thus far and the extent of my analysis.
It would also, I'm sorry.
Sure, please.
That would also mean, if I'm hearing you correctly, that it is not a prohibition.
Correct.
As I said, there's nothing in the language that strictly prohibits anybody from running for a third term who has already served 2 terms. I think that's the retroactive issue. There is a statement to the extent that this is considered prospective in effect. What that means, I don't know. But I cannot say it clearly means that it is intended to be retroactive in effect.
In my feeling, the comment at the end, piggybacking on what Mr. Korb said, the comment at the end, anyone who does so in direct violation of the will of the people, is saying it's possible.
Yeah,
so
okay. I won't belabor the point. Thank
sure,
you.
But that's where the thinking was coming from.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes.
If I could just, so with no council action tonight, staff will continue under our existing direction of updating the FAQ periodically based on the discussion and consensus and the questions that have been raised in council meetings. We will provide facts that have been in dispute as part of that FAQ that relate to the ballot measure, which we have not done previously. But given the issues that have been raised in 2 council meetings, we will do so using what we've provided with you tonight as the basis for that.
Thank you. And I have one further question about this topic, and perhaps it's for you, Mr. Korb. We have a listserv. Is the town allowed to, for instance, the FAQs that we have on our website, okay? That's public domain, that's public information. Those are simply facts. There's no advocacy there, they're simply facts. Do we have the ability to send out those FAQs? Do we have the right to send out those FAQs on our town website via our listserv?
Our listserv it serves only those individuals who have requested to receive information, and the answer is yes. We're not prohibited from sending out informational items.
Thank you. Council, since we're on this topic and it's agendized, could I get some feedback or input regarding our dissemination of the information, which is now on our town website, also to those who have signed up to receive information on our listserv? Vice Mayor McNutt.
Well, to be truthful, I don't always open that listserv notice because almost all the time that I've ever seen it, all it says is that the website has been updated, which is perhaps not the best way to use a listserv, but that's a whole different conversation.
That is.
So I don't see any difference in sending out a listserv notice that the website has been updated related to the library FAQs as it's been updated with the new Music in the Park concert schedule.
Okay.
It's just
But
a
saying it's
routine.
been updated regarding library FAQs.
But if you were talking about breaking from that tradition and actually embedding in the email that goes to the listserv the
link?
FAQ, that would be a totally different way of approaching it. And I think I'm not sure I would be comfortable with that. But I think just like we always do, that we can use the listserv.
That we can. Okay. Are there further comments over here? Okay, well, I'm going to try another motion then that's related to this agendized item. And it has to do with, number one, it says provide direction regarding the dissemination of this information. I'm going to suggest that the FAQs that we have on our town website be disseminated through our listserv with a very, very simple message, as Vice Mayor McNutt was just talking about, that says something to the effect of, attached, please find the FAQs regarding the, what do we title it? Do we title it Capital Finance Ballot Measures, or do we title it Library? I'm not sure what we entitle that.
I believe right now the new library project is just FAQ about the new library project.
Okay.
We would have a couple of questions in there that address questions that have come to council in your past meetings about the library or about the capital financing ballot measure.
Okay, so I guess my motion will be, council, for your consideration, is that we send out the VR listserv, or what's new, to those people that have asked for information about the town. A couple of sentences that includes a link. They just click on the link, and it opens up the FAQ page. It's available to them at losgatasca.gov when they go to the website. Mr. Brzezinski.
Is that our common practice, to provide a link for sections of the website? Then I would be against that. I think we have to go with where we are right now. It's perfectly fine to say there's new information regarding the library. Please visit the town website, but not to link specifically.
Okay, no, I like that comment, though. There's new information regarding the library. Please go to, boom. Okay. Mr. Rice.
I'm just going to make a general statement that I would like to avoid the appearance and the actual action of advocating for or against something that may or may not happen. If it happens and it ends up on the ballot, that's a different issue. But right now, I feel like we're giving attention to a spoiled child who's making a lot of noise, and by paying attention to him, what you do is you encourage bad behavior. Now, if this comes up to where it qualifies for the ballot, then I think it is right for this body to make clear certain things. Until we know what is or is not going to happen, I don't think we need to be doing anything in particular at this moment.
Okay. My hope was to educate the people as soon as possible so that they knew the full extent of what was before them in the ballot initiative. And personally, I believe they knew the full information. They would choose not to sign, but I just wanted to give them the information to make that decision. But I see I'm in the minority and I don't have the votes, so we will leave things as is and no change.
Again, unless council directs otherwise, staff will continue its normal pattern and practice of updating the library FAQ with new information. This is new information that will be included in that FAQ.
That's where we are. Thank you very much. Thank you, council. We now move on to item number 25. Nope, we just did 25. We now move on to the pulled consent items. Oh, Councilmember Spector.
I was going to pull agenda item 10, and it's been pulled in conjunction with 3 other items. My request would be that I could speak to 10 separately in some fashion, however you want to do it.
Thank you. Why don't you speak to 10 right now, and then we'll turn to Citizen Ray so that he can say what because he also pulled this item, and then we'll deal with 10, then we'll deal with the others.
Well, what I was going to say before I found out that that it had already been pulled is that I don't pull agenda items from the consent calendar lightly, that I've actually given this a lot of thought, and this is the Los Gatos Boulevard, and my concern is moving forward without having complete traffic information. You know, for the past, 5 decades, Los Gatos Boulevard has been sort of like the good child in your home, the boulevard that generates a lot of tax income but not very much traffic. And now that paradigm is changing, and we don't have all of the traffic information. We don't know how much traffic is going to be generated by the 6 large pieces of land which we know are going to be developed. And I believe that we should use this period of time between now and the beginning of August, when we do have time available to us, to do an assessment of traffic so that we can make a reasoned decision with not only this application, but all the applications down the line. We are currently going at a level of D on Los Gatos Boulevard, and when are we going to hit F? F is a breakdown of our traffic movement. When are we going to get to that point? What are we going to do if the next application puts us at an F? Are we going to say you can't do it? Or are we going to say yes you can, and the people who are driving on Los Gatos Boulevard just have to deal with it? All I'm saying is that get us more information before we move forward on Los Gatos Boulevard projects.
Thank you, Councilmember Rice. And Mr. Larson, question for you as far as...
No, it's Ms. Spector, actually.
That's it, Rice? Sorry, Ms. Spector.
Yes.
Mr. Larson, question of you regarding Mrs. Spector's comments about traffic studies on the boulevard.
Yes. Initiating a new traffic study and having that brought back to council by August, I would not be willing to commit to without looking at the resources and staff time available. The one staff initiative we did start after the last council meeting in your consideration of Gateway was going back to the review and approval of the general plan in 2000, resurrecting the traffic study that was done for the approval of that general plan, and what were the assumptions for long-term development during the life of the general plan along the boulevard. So we would have a more detailed answer than we gave you at your last council meeting about what's already assumed in our currently adopted general plan. Now, we will be doing, as part of the new general plan, that we're just in really the start of that update process, a new environmental review and traffic study, but that's a year and a half away, and that would be a town-wide consideration.
Okay, well, I certainly share Councilmember Spector's comments and concerns that the boulevard is changing. It's going to change from auto dealerships that produced X number of cars going in to a mixed-use retail and office, retail and perhaps housing. We don't know as each project comes before us. And we certainly need to have an understanding of what that boulevard can sustain and what it can handle. And I think that that's very important to get our hands on that. Yes.
And every individual project obviously is required to do its project-specific traffic analysis if there are environmental issues that are related to that, if the initial study identifies traffic as a required component. And then there is a requirement that there be a cumulative analysis as well, which is different than the language the Planning Commission was using 3 meetings ago when the Gateway project was considered. It was the same word, but there was even explicit discussion on are they talking cumulative in a SEQA parlance or cumulative in a public drivability experiential definition.
Okay, well, that information I think is important to us as we proceed. Mr. Brzezinski.
Just a point of clarification. I don't know how far we can take this discussion because we're basically finished with that application. But I want to clarify one thing. I do not believe that the traffic studies indicated level D at all the intersections on Los Gatos Boulevard, as Councilmember Spector indicated. In fact, I know it's not the case. Second of all, the 2000 study was a traffic study of potential impacts based on traffic at that time. If you remember 2000, we were in the height of the boom. And therefore, since that time, there's been a decrease in the amount of traffic. As a resident observer, I can say that that is true. But I think that we have to be very careful about assumptions we make in regards to what the current level of traffic is. Perhaps we can have a clarification of that from the traffic engineer, which I think may not have been quite as clear in the last presentation on the Gateway project that is at a later date. But I want to be very clear that I do not think that it's accurate that intersections are a D. In fact, he said, B was the standard that we saw up there. Because remember, you asked the question, Mr. Mayor, about A versus B, and he said, well, C is actually what is expected in the valley. And, we would have to look at each intersection, but I don't think that any of them, at least by the study, is at this point at a D level.
Councilmember Rice.
Actually,
Councilmember Spector.
Right now, we don't have the information. When I raised the issue, I did not anticipate, that we would be doing an expensive and extensive study. But we know what the zoning is on those pieces of property. We know what the general plan designation is. We have information that will tell us what office / retail / restaurants will do. We could get in a fairly short amount of time more information than we have now. And all I'm saying is we're moving forward. We got information of the council this past week that Honda, we're going to be looking at either 2 or 3 pieces of property there, and people want to develop it. We know that about every single piece of land, the large parcels. And I just think it's incumbent upon us as the town council, as the ultimate planners, to plan as opposed to react to each of these large pieces of property.
Thank you. Councilmember Rice.
While I'm never averse to getting more information as opposed to less, I'm just not sure what that has to do with us approving or not approving this particular ordinance. So if we want to, as a separate issue, take up that we'd like to get a more detailed prospective traffic information on the boulevard, I'm not sure I disagree with that. I'm just not sure that's relevant to what's already been done and what we need to approve this evening.
Mr. Larson?
When we do finish our review of the general plan 2000 traffic study data, we'll provide that to council, and as is your typical process, 2 members of the council can pull that up for council discussion, and it will be agendized as such.
Thank you very much. And now, Citizen Ray, we're going to take you out of order here. I'm going to do number 10, because that's the one we're talking about right now, which is the adopting the ordinance approving a zone change from CH to CHPD for a 2-story commercial building. And we're talking about 15400 Los Gatos Boulevard. So if you'll speak about 10 first.
Very nice, Mr. Mayor, very nice. And I want to thank Ms. Spector for bringing up one of the major problems that I see in this approval that you're being asked to give tonight, okay? And I'll give you the example that I have picked out. In the model ordinance that you're being asked to approve tonight, it stipulates that the northbound left turn lane at Los Gatos Boulevard Village Square intersection shall be extended to a minimum of 200 feet to accommodate the potential queue from project-related left turn movement. Now, I drove by today to take a look at the existing left turn queue of the main entrance to this property. It's about 60 or 70 feet. So this project is projected to increase the daily traffic to this office retail development in the amount of 2,000 car trips a day in Los Gatos. 2,000. And what good would be a 200-foot left-turn queue do when it's already three-quarters used up? 200 feet is 10 cars, or maybe 11 is all. It's absurd engineering, absurd. I mean, you folks are on the cusp, as Ms. Spector has said, of changing the whole lifestyle of Los Gatos Boulevard and environs. And you don't even know it, except Ms. Spector. And the staff doesn't know it. Or maybe they do. I mean, it is so ugly, it's not to be believed, okay? And I also want to point out, Mr. Wasserman said at the last meeting, why should we object to this proposal when it has no variances, no problems, no issues, as a sideline? But Mr. Wasserman doesn't seem to understand all the issues, and I'm going to give you the huge one right here. The underlying ordinance, CH ordinance, neighborhood commercial, stipulates that for every foot a building exceeds 20 foot in height, and this building is at 35, so that's 15 foot. Each setback will be increased by 15 feet, okay?
Thank you. Your time is up on number 10, okay? You'll have time on 3, 20, and 21 in just a minute. Council, any further discussion on item number 10? No? Do I see a Mr. Ress?
No, I was going to move adoption of the ordinances specified in item 10 with the correction that was given to us as a desk item.
Second.
Motion made and second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call for the question. All in favor of approving number 10? Say aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No. Okay. Mr. Davis, you've got 3, 20, and 21. 3 is an investment report, 20 is the minutes, and 21 is the library project. And let's do 6 minutes and just keep rolling. So if you want to do 1 minute on one and 4 on another, that's your choice. More or less on any one.
All right. Investment report for April 2009. I have it in front of me. I think it's important for the people of Los Gatos to understand the cash flow situation of the town. For this past month, the investment portfolio of Los Gatos has increased to $84,683,000 from last month at $81 million. A year ago at $76,500,000. That's almost $10 million for the year. And yet, regularly we get all this worrying and crying about the future because we're going broke. What a bunch of nonsense. Mr. Wasserman, you're the primary proponent of the crying and moaning, okay? So I'm going to have to give you a nickname, okay? It's going to be Weenie. Weenie Wasserman, the king of nonsense. Okay? That's you, as far as I'm concerned. Number, we go from 10, which got shortcutted, over to 20. The minutes, all right? And I do have the minutes here somewhere. The minutes read that I said the following, that I commented that there are no homeowner associations that come to council meetings. And that is not what I said. I said, I've been here 10 years in this community, and for 10 years I have never heard of a single homeowner association. Never heard. So, that's what I said. So be it. Okay? number 21, the Los Gatos Library Project. Again, RDA funding is the sole source for this project. It's unbelievable. All the property taxes from Almond Grove, the downtown commercial area, are going to be funneled into a library project that is prohibited by the RDA law, okay? I have read it numerous times looking for any explanation, and all it says under libraries is land use is appropriate. Land use is appropriate. But that's not what I'm talking about. Further on, the document prohibits the building of any new construction of a public facility. Period. End of story. And none of you want to realize that, okay? And so all the people in Almond Grove, the commercial area, are being cheated out of the funds that they were, and the blight removal that they were promised, okay? You're robbing Peter to pay Paul. You're taking the money from the RDA folks, and you're going to spend it on the library, which should be paid for by everybody, not just the RDA property owners. That's the basic difference, okay? It's ugly, uglier than sin. Grand jury. I thought maybe I wouldn't have to, but I can see I'm going to have to. So you have my promise. Okay, Brzezinski? Good. So I guess that's it. I've said it all, and I have extra time. Isn't that wonderful? What else shall I talk about? Thank you.
You're welcome. Public session is now closed. I want to thank all of you that stayed here this evening to the ripe hour. Now we're turning back to council. We have Mr. Larson first.
Mr. Mayor, just two comments. First, on our investment report, there has been an $8 million increase over the last year, not $10 million. $6 million of that is from the payment from the county for sports facilities. The other $2 million is largely for capital and economic reserves that we've accumulated over the last year. On item 21, I did want to introduce the one person who has stayed with us tonight, who is Namone Lee Hardesty, who is the project manager for Swinnerton, who is here for the approval of item 21, should the council have any questions for her.
Boy, did you pick one. Wow. Well, welcome.
Mr. Mayor? Mr. Mayor?
And sorry.
So we can get
Brzezinski.
the young lady out of the house. I'd like to move to approve the consent items 3, 20, and 21, as stated.
Motion made to approve 3, 20, and 21.
I'll second.
We have a second. Any discussion? No. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? None. Carries unanimously. Bet she's wondering what she signed.
Very rare.